This is Atomic Shinobi, and today I'm going to narrate ninth part of What If Naruto Was Trained by an Assassin. If you enjoyed this video, please like, share, and subscribe to this channel. Now, wasting no more time, let's start the story.
After making sure there were no enemy shinobi in the area with her Byakugan activated, Hinata walked slowly toward the assassin warehouse, her mother and sister trailing behind. There had been heavy fighting in the clan district, where it was clear that enemy infiltrators wanted to cause harm to Konoha's bloodlines and clans. Thus, Hinata took Hitomi and Hanabi to the next safest location she could think of rather than returning them to the Hyuga clan. As they got closer to the warehouse, Hitomi, who had also been using her Byakugan, blinked in surprise. She said to Hinata, I can't see inside, and Hinata nodded in agreement. I'll explain inside, Hinata said, channeling chakra as she bit her thumb and put that hand next to the main door. A seal glowed for a moment before vanishing and the door partially opened. With haste, Hinata pulled the door open, ushered them inside, then went inside and shut the door. She turned to Hanabi and Hitomi, who were both surveying their surroundings with a mixture of fear and wonder, and it locked behind her. Hanabi silently questioned, What is this place? As he turned to face Hinata, who was making her way to the neighboring armory. At this point, Hinata had lowered her hood to reveal that her hair was now shoulder length, or that it would be if it weren't in a braid that kept it out of the way beneath her hood. Hinata was drawing back her bow and taking a few arrows out of a container. Hinata turned back to face them as she heard Hanabi's question. As she put the arrows back into her bow, Hinata remarked, It's kind of a secret clubhouse. She asked, speaking in simpler terms for her younger sister so as not to overwhelm her at this point. I have some friends who helped train me, helped me to grow stronger. But you can't tell anyone about this place, okay Imouto? She looked at her mom, who gave a slight nod of comprehension. Hinata approached them and ducked in front of Hanabi. You will be safe here though. The man who owns this place made sure of that. Yes, in the years since establishing the sanctuary, Raphael had taken great care to ensure its safety. The warehouse was officially registered as the property of a merchant, and Sarutobi ensured that all records pertaining to the warehouse and the merchant who owned it were authentic. Then, in order to secure the warehouse, Raphael had gone and recruited the assistance of a black market fuinjutsu expert. Chakra masking seals were placed in place to block chakra sensors and bloodlines, such as the Byakugan, from seeing inside the warehouse, in addition to the exterior locking seals on each entrance that could only be opened by someone whose chakra and blood had been entered into the seal. Reinforcement seals were applied to the walls to prevent damage to the structure, and in the unlikely event that the sanctuary was breached, a self-destruct seal was included. Raphael had made his selections carefully because, of course, any fuinjutsu expert hired to create the seals would find all of this suspicious. Using a honest business as a front for his illicit activities, he had assumed the identity of a black market merchant and chose a rather competent seal expert who was renowned for both his skill and his suspected, but unverified, double dealings. After putting up the seals as instructed, he would sell bandits and thieves information regarding the security configuration of the buildings he had his seals on. Within the criminal underworld, rumors circulated that this specific black market sealer was indirectly to blame for the deaths of at least 8 of his clients, 2 of whom were law-abiding, innocent individuals who were only seeking protection for themselves and their families, who had also perished. The expert in fuinjutsu had completed the task and received payment for it, but before he could go more than 5 miles outside of Konoha, Kaseki had caught up with him and killed him to become a full assassin so that he would never betray another person. Hinata got up, and Hanabi, looking somewhat relieved, settled against Hitomi. As she was about to say, like I said, you'll be safe here. But I need to get back out there. Hanabi abruptly grabbed her arm. Fearfully, she exclaimed, No, you can't go. Chan, you can't go. You need to stay here, please. Hanabi looked up at Hinata when she felt a gentle touch on her head. In an attempt to soothe her, Hinata gave her a gentle head rub. Hanabi, I have to go, she murmured. I'm a kunoichi of Konoha, and I need to help defend the village. Hanabi whimpered, tears beginning to well up in her eyes. But, I need you. But as Hitomi softly put her hands on Hanabi's shoulders, she looked up. Hanabi, she's right, Hitomi mutely remarked. Hinata needs to go out there, to help drive the enemy away. She needs to help others like she helped us. That's what being a kunoichi is about. Hanabi shuddered and gave Hinata a tight hug. She cried, Why don't you need to come back? Chan, come back. Feeling happy and sad at the same time, Hinata gave Hanabi a hug in return. She knelt down and kissed the top of her sister's head. I will Imouto. I'll come back, and then we can talk. I want to hear all about what I've missed, she muttered. Reluctantly, the young Hyuga girl nodded and released her. Hinata nodded toward the rear of the warehouse and looked up at Hitomi. If anyone starts attacking this place, there's a ladder leading up to the roof, but there's also a secret escape tunnel. The entrance is in the meeting hall in the back, behind the dais and brazier. Turn the right torch sconce to the left to open the door. It'll take you to one of the training grounds near the edge of the village, quietly stated. With a nod, Hitomi patted her exiled daughter on the shoulder. She said, "Thank you," in a whisper, "and good luck." With a nod, Hinata turned and hurriedly opened the warehouse door before leaving, making sure it locked behind her. She took a deep breath, turned back to the village, and headed to the nearest sound of fighting, her eyes hardening slightly as she drew her bow and prayed the rest of her friends and teammates were okay. Raphael was struggling mightily against his masked opponent at the arena. The man carried 2 curved knives and was dressed as an Anbu member, complete with mask and cloak. Raphael was forced to use his hidden blades and dagger because of the other fighters in the area's confines. He had trained with these weapons for a long time, so he was proficient with them, but he still needed to improve his reflexes and speed to rival that of shinobi in this world. In these fields, he was at least high chunin to low junin, but his opponent was faster. Raphael's skill with his weapons was the only thing keeping him up to speed. He stabbed at the man's face with his right hidden blade, using his dagger in a reverse grip to block a slash and use it to force the curved kunai down. The man in the mask raised his left kunai to try to cut Raphael's arm, but Raphael sprang back, snatching 2 throwing knives with his right hand and hurling them at the man in the mask. The masked figure avoided the one that was buried in the back of Asuna Shinobi's neck and easily blocked the other. As the figure charged at him, Raphael reached down and fiddled with his right bracer. Then, he moved quickly to block the unknown shinobi's quick slash and grabbed his opponent's arm when he attempted to slash him with the other blade and drag him into a knee to the midsection. With lightning speed, the masked figure blocked with his own leg and then kicked Raphael in the chest, sending the assassin reeling backward. He then slashed quickly, leaving a scratch across the assassin's chest and along the leather armor. Raphael swiftly raised his bracer and threw a poison dart at his opponent. The opponent had to dodge it, but was unable to avoid Raphael's follow-up kick, which struck the side of his head and launched the Anbu mask skyward. The figure turned to show Kabuto's bespectacled face. Raphael's eyes narrowed upon seeing the appearance of his opponent. He recognized the face and said, "You. I recognize you. I've seen you around the hospital a few times, despite never having spoken to him. You're a Konoha shinobi." Kabuto just grinned and pushed his glasses back up onto his nose. He responded, "Not exactly. That's just my day job," even though he was actually sporting an auto insignia on his forehead protector rather than a Konoha one. "It's a shame you uncovered my identity. Now I will definitely need to kill you, to try and keep my cover." "I'm not that easy to kill," Raphael remarked, noticing that the fighting had subsided and they now had a little more room. He moved his dagger from one hand to the other, drawing his sword with his left. Kabuto simply assumed a fighting stance, holding both of his blades in reverse. This was more effective for them because of their curved design, and he rushed forward to cut low at Raphael. Raphael easily deflected the kunai with his sword, turning to try stabbing Kabuto in the back, but the traitor also turned to flee, so they found themselves facing each other once more. The two got back into a hail of sparks and slashes. With a sword, Raphael wasn't any faster. In fact, the length made his blows a little slower. The length, however, also kept Kabuto farther away, which made it more difficult for him to launch an attack despite his increased speed. Raphael was able to parry with the dagger in the few instances that Kabuto was able to get past the sword, employing it as a defensive tool while his sword served as his main offensive weapon. Kabuto tried to look past that sword and grimaced mentally. He had assumed the persona of a genin in order to spy for Orochimaru, but his true level was more akin to a mid-level Junin. Though, in his own opinion, he might even be able to match Kakashi Hitaki himself. In actuality, though, he lacked many conventional or standard offensive skills. He lacked proficiency in most other areas, but he was extremely skilled with his kunai and several medical jutsu, some of which he had repurposed to use offensively. His areas of expertise included experimentation, espionage, medicine, and healing. He was undoubtedly a formidable fighter, but he struggled to defeat opponents who could match him in his domains since he was unable to use other strategies to subdue or attack them. That did not imply that the conflict had ended or reached a standstill. It simply meant he had to make the most of his advantages. And one thing he did know from the gossip that surrounded Konoha was that this strange fighter harbored a soft spot for his master's lackluster performance as a pupil. He was aware of the rumors that Enko was seen with this man both in more private and shinobi settings. Thus, it was evident to him that Enko was a vulnerability. He quickly parried a thrust from Raphael, hoping to get close enough to attack while the assassin was unbalanced. However, Raphael's practice paid off, as he used the misdirected sword thrust to launch a surprise dagger jab that tore a small hole in Kabuto's cloak as the traitor narrowly avoided the short blade. With her back to Enko, Kabuto smirked as she used that brief moment to locate him and cut an Auto Nin's throat with her Ulax. Rushing past Raphael, he was going after the kunoichi once more. Raphael darted after Kabuto to stop him, his eyes widening with shock and panic. Raphael called out to Enko as he saw Kabuto rear back with one of his kunai, ready to throw it. As Kabuto threw the curved blade towards her, the Junin sensei of Team 8 turned just in time to witness it catch sunlight. The blade spun wickedly through the air. Her perspective had abruptly shifted, leaving her bewildered before she could respond. Glancing around quickly, she discovered that she was several feet behind the robed and cloaked attacker, but her eyes widened in horror at what lay beyond him. With a grimace on his face, Raphael was on his knees where she had been, the curved blade embedded in his right shoulder, having struck the weak spot in his armor where his chestplate and right pauldron met. Because it was made of leather, the armor was not strong enough to withstand the force of the throw, and it was thin where two separate armor pieces met instead of overlapping or being one solid piece. Kabuto grinned, his strategy successful. In order to shield her, Raphael had substituted Enko and taken the hit in her place. He was now dangerously weak and ready to kill. Raising his right hand, which was now devoid of a weapon, Kabuto used the Chakra no Mesu, chakra scalpel, technique until it glowed green with chakra. It was a technique that required intense chakra control and focus, and it was used by medical ninja to make incisions inside a person's body without leaving an open wound that could become infected. It would be nearly impossible for those shinobi who knew it to focus during a battle, so very few of them could ever use it as a weapon. One of those shinobi was Kabuto. Raphael launched his sword in a swift motion to protect himself with his left hand, but Kabuto quickly turned and struck at Raphael's left, causing him to cry out in agony as he felt his left arm go limp due to the damage to its muscles. Smirking, Kabuto moved to take aim at Raphael's neck, but was pushed back when multiple snakes shot out from under Enko's arm and strayed toward his face. With her eyes full of hate and the promise of pain, the purple-haired kunoichi moved quickly between Raphael and Kabuto, her face a mask of rage. Kabuto just gave a small wince, but braced himself for combat. In another part of the arena, Kaseki watched as the Auto shinobi she was fighting dropped to the ground, bleeding out, before yanking one of her blades out of his body. As the Uchiha matriarch finished breaking Asuna shinobi's neck, she turned, her eyes blazing with the Sharingan, her other hand flicking 3 shuriken towards an Auto kunoichi who was about to strike Makoto in the back. The non-combatants of their clan who were present for the finals were surrounded by a ring that the other combat-capable Uchiha had formed to protect them. Many of the infiltrators had set their sights on the clan section of the arena, believing that the clans represented Konoha's greatest strength and that they should be destroyed. Only to encounter strong opposition as the clans displayed not only their might but also the strength of the bonds that the Konoha shinobi had formed via cooperation and trust. With her eyes narrowing, Kaseki turned away from her 6th kill of the game and observed the genin of Naruto and Hinata's year group battling to join them. She tapped another Uchiha shinobi to let him know she was moving away when she noticed a few Suna shinobi closing in on them. Taking up the slack, the Uchiha rushed forward with the grace and speed of a well-trained Junin, her eyes scanning everything in her path to avoid being caught off guard. When Tenten had finished removing a dead Konoha shinobi's weapons, she grimaced. She whispered, "The one time I'm not armed," and closed the shinobi's eyes while the others huddled up against her. After defeating the genjutsu that had been placed over the arena, they began to battle their way in the direction of the clans. Soon after Shikamaru and Ino arrived, they were joined by Lee and his sensei, who was training the 2 green-clad shinobi to defeat multiple shinobi with their superior speed and taijutsu training before the other shinobi realized what was happening. With a swift spin, Ino struck an enemy shinobi in the face with the ball end of her kusarigama, sending them reeling into Choji's powerful right that sent them crashing to the ground. With the blade of her weapon, she blocked a kunai and then swung the chain around her opponent's legs, pulling the kunoichi to the ground. Kiba then used his passing fang, to slam into her, driving her deep into the ground. In the meantime, Shikamaru was assisting Shino in keeping an eye on their blind spots and eliminating any additional shinobi that might have sneaked up on them. The sluggish Nara groaned and continued trying to find the safest path to get them to the clan members. "We need to keep moving," he said. The issue was that as fighters moved to eliminate their existing opponents, the battle across the arena kept shifting. As the number of Oto and Suna shinobi attackers decreased, Konoha shinobi were increasingly the ones doing that. Though it appeared clear that the wall defenders had kept any outside enemies from entering to reinforce their allies, the enemy had received little reinforcement from other infiltrators throughout the village. For them, that was a blessing. Just as he turned to face them, he sensed someone was following him. When he turned to face a Suna shinobi who was going to stab him with a kunai, a blue blur struck the shinobi and drove a blade through their chest so quickly that it protruded from their back. The shadowy form of Kaseki pulled her blade back from the Suna shinobi and spun to sever the second one close to them by slashing their throat with her second blade. After eliminating the immediate threat, she turned to face the genin. She gave the order, "You need to move quickly and get to the clan members." With a nod, Shikamaru gestured to the others. "You heard her," he exclaimed. His current indolent demeanor vanished. This had seemed all the more real to him because of the battle and the near-death experience. After watching them flee, Kaseki returned to the battle and moved on to find her next target. In another place, Ace scowled as he and his shinobi stood at the meeting spot, waiting for the group he had sent to capture Operation Blind Eye's target, Hanabi Hyuga. But for now, they were nowhere to be found. Karabi was wriggling in discomfort. "We should get going, bro. The others are being way too slow." A glared at the Hachibi Jinchuriki, growling. He yelled, "Enough with the rapping." Mabui muttered, "He is not wrong though, Asama. We should leave as soon as possible, before Konoha shinobi find us out." A began, "We give them 5 more minutes and Thina," when 3 masked figures with the lifeless body of a fourth one appeared. In a moment, one of them bowed his head. He mutely said, "Raikage. Sama, I'm sorry to report our mission was a failure. The target's guards killed one of our number, and when we retreated to meet the 2 who were supposed to retrieve the target, they failed to show up at the rendezvous point. We have seen no sign of them or the target." A gave that an enraged growl. He snarled angrily, turning to slam a fist into a tree, causing it to splinter and fall. How could they have possibly failed? It was a little girl and her untrained mother, he exclaimed. He started to pace and growl once more. The shinobi had probably been intercepted and defeated if they hadn't shown up. That is to say, they might currently be under the control of Konoha shinobi. With the chunin he had submitted as genin, he was able to avert grave consequences because everything they did was subject to the exam's regulations. But if they found out that Konoha's men were the ones they were holding, there would be no way to escape retaliation this time. If they had caught his men, he needed a way to hedge his bets so that Konoha wouldn't demand justice. He turned to face the enormous purple energy barrier that surrounded the arena and decided what to do. He rolled his shoulders grudgingly and said, "Mabui, you're in charge here. Keep everyone safe. Darui, Karabi, you're with me. We have a job to do." With a simple sigh, Darui followed, leaving the other Kumo shinobi in his wake. Watching from the wall, Jiraiya saw the Suna and Oto shinobi try again to charge the wall, but they were pushed back by the defenders because they were unable to pass through the hell he and Gamabunta had created. The defenders were able to hold off the enemy because the wall was holding. He turned, frowning, and looked around at the barrier that surrounded his sensei's previous location before deciding what to do. He turned to face the closest Junin and gave an order. Then he leapt away and headed towards the arena. "Keep holding this position. The fire should burn for a while, but if it starts to falter, regroup to hold the breach, and send for reinforcements," he said. Sarutobi whirled Enma around his head in staff form on the rooftop, aiming a blow at Hashirama who sidestepped the impact. Using Enma as a pole, he leapt into the air and threw several shuriken at the former Konoha leaders as Tobarama attempted to strike him from behind. They both avoided it with ease, only to be hit by a strong mudslide that came out of an earthen dragon's mouth. In an attempt to hold the 2 caged still, Sarutobi followed up with a strong gout of flame from his mouth, solidifying the mud that had caught them. Sarutobi turned in time to avoid a slash from Orochimaru, who was brandishing a sword with a straight blade that was emerging from a hilt shaped like a snake. As Orochimaru stabbed at him, Sarutobi used his staff to block the blow. Enma winced and he leapt back. "I can't take too many hits from that blade, Hiruzen. Even my adamantine form can't stand up to the Kusanagi," he stated. Sarutobi simply nodded, preparing to take on his erstwhile pupil. Orochimaru displayed some degree of proficiency with his blade as he unleashed a barrage of slashes and thrusts. Sarutobi attempted to reduce the amount of contact between his summon and the blade by deftly dodging and parrying each blow. Unfortunately, Hashirama and Tobirama were released from their makeshift prison very quickly when strong branches suddenly broke through the mud. One of the Anbu gasped in amazement outside the barrier. The Mokuton of the Senju clan. I did not think to see it outside of Tenzo, he murmured. The Anbu who had spoken bowed slightly as the captain turned his attention to the fighting inside the barrier. Do not be so in awe of an ability turned against our leader, the captain snapped. The appearance of Jiraiya diverted their attention as his eyes immediately registered the situation and a grimace emerged on his face. Gazing intently at the barrier, Jiraiya inquired, how long have they been fighting? About 20 minutes now. Orochimaru summoned the fallen Hokage only a few minutes ago, but Hokage Sama has been hard-pressed since then to hold them back, the captain of the Anbu stated. Jiraiya nodded curtly and moved toward the barrier. Anything you can tell me about this barrier? He inquired. Jiraiya was taunted by one of the Auto Shinobi who was holding up the barrier. He was a gray-haired man with a second head growing out of his back and what appeared to be lipstick on his lips. Why don't you touch it and find out, he replied. Jiraiya mostly ignored him, making only one remark. He pulled out a scroll and said, big talk from someone cowering behind a barrier. Say that to my face where I can hit you. He needed to move quickly and attempt to get past the obstacle. He recoiled in horror as he watched his sensei go reeling from an Orochimaru kick and land squarely in the path of Hashirama's vicious haymaker. With one arm, Sarutobi just about stopped it, but his eyes widened when he saw Tobirama complete the hand signals for a jutsu. Swiftly using his own jutsu, Sarutobi built a huge earth wall even as Tobirama threw a huge waterfall at him that could have flooded a small village. Luckily, the earth wall kept the water from overwhelming him, but as the rooftop began to take on the appearance of a small forest, more enormous branches began to sprout through it. Pausing to catch his breath, Sarutobi landed on one branch. He was aware that aging was finally catching up with him, but this fight was highlighting it for him now. He was running out of strategies and tactics to take on Orochimaru and his sensei, and if this went on for much longer, he would undoubtedly lose. And Konoha would be exposed to these adversaries. No matter what, he couldn't let that happen. His eyes grew wide as he felt the next blow approaching, and he scrambled back just in time to avoid being sliced through by Orochimaru's sword, which was now quite a distance away. The old Hokage clutched his staff and hoped the rest of the village was safe as the blade withdrew back to the snake Sanin, who smirked at him. Outside of the forest as he hid behind a tree and felt Senbon snare him, Naruto winced. The puppet of his opponent was armed to the teeth with swords, smoke bombs, and Senbon. He was taking no chances, not taking any hits, because they were probably all laced with poison as well to make them more lethal and effective. Even though Kyuubi gave him an advanced healing factor, he didn't want to take a chance in case one of the poisons was too quickly acting for Kyuubi to remove from his body in time. Senbon stopped hitting his tree, so he instantly created a shadow clone that darted into the open and attracted the attention of his opponent. With his clone distracting his opponent, he moved stealthily around the other side, giving Naruto the time he needed to locate Kankuro, who had hidden shortly after the battle started. Naruto had little knowledge of Suna's puppet users, shinobi who were experts at using chakra threads to manipulate puppets in battle instead of employing more conventional fighting methods. Rather than allowing their opponent to take down the puppeteer, a puppet user would frequently disappear, leaving them to face the puppet. And to get the better of their opponents, they frequently used poison and deceit. Naruto's melee fighting style suffered a great deal as a result, but it also worked to his advantage. He knew, at least in general, how his opponent would use deceit and stealth against him. Things that Naruto, in his capacity as an assassin, had been honing for years. He had learned how to find people in hiding by working with Enko, Yugito, Kaseki, and Raphael, all the while maintaining his own position of mystery. Now he applied those lessons, tiptoeing through the undergrowth while his clone tried not to give up. Kankuro just grinned from where he was hiding. Considering the boy's past combat experience and arsenal, he had surmised that the boy was a close quarters fighter. Now, however, the boy was turning that skill against him, constantly hitting long range with his puppet to prevent him from getting too close. All the while remaining anonymous because he was aware that if the brat got too close, he would be destroyed. His taijutsu skills were very poor, and he was easily overwhelmed. His sly smile gave way to a victorious grin as his puppet hit the blonde multiple times, but the smile quickly disappeared when he vanished into a cloud of smoke, exposing it to be a shadow clone. Simultaneously, he sensed a presence behind him, which prompted him to leap from the bush he was hiding in. A blade sliced through the air, severing his hood's cat ears. When he turned around, he was struggling to get his puppet close to him, but the blonde was already on him, swinging his sword downward. Due to lack of other options, He used his puppet to replace himself, causing it to be sliced in half from top to bottom. Frantically, Kankuro attempted to use the internal blades to disconnect and remove the limbs, but Naruto didn't give him a chance. Instead, he leapt at him, drove a foot into the puppet user's chest, and sent him flying into a tree. Hearing her brother's agonized cry, Temari turned in her own battle with Sasuke. "Kankuro!" she exclaimed, trying to use her fan to throw Naruto back, but instead she was forced to deflect a blow from Sasuke that sent her reeling. With a smile on his face, Sasuke dashed in quickly to kick her fan out of her hands while she was unbalanced. The kick's momentum allowed him to spin and land a second kick on her chest, sending her to the ground next to her unconscious brother. Naruto turned to Sasuke and panted lightly as he swiftly used 2 clones to pin them both. "That's over with now," he said. With a nod, Sasuke observed as the 2 clones proceeded to bind Temari and Kankuro. His Sharingan eyes widened in shock and horror as he turned to face where they had seen the red-haired Jinchuriki laid out. "Yeah. Now we just need to take care of Gaara," he said. As a blast of sand shot through where they had both stood, slamming into the clones and their prisoners, he yelled, "Look out!" and tackled Naruto. The siblings were sent rolling along the ground, wailing in agony, as the clones were scattered. The 2 Konoha genin glanced up, their eyes widening as they saw Gaara grinning crazily. The redhead had a vicious, sadistic smile on his face, but there was a hideous growth made of sand on the right side of his head and right arm. The black and gold eye took the place of the aqua-colored one, and the right side of his mouth was now filled with fangs. Where he'd been transformed, his arm was a massive, muscular construct with claws at the end and tattoos all over it in dark blue colors. He shot his arm towards them, sand reaching out, and shouted, "Yes, yes, yes. You're both strong, so very strong. I can sense it. Mother wants your blood. She'll have your blood." Watching the arm hit where they had been just a few seconds before, the 2 genin leapt away. Gaara smiled and quickly withdrew his arm, ready to launch himself at them once more. After finishing a few hand gestures quickly, Sasuke shot a strong stream of flames directly at Gaara from his mouth. The flames consumed the Jinchuriki, who simply raised his arm of sand in front of him without even trying to dodge. Before releasing the jutsu, Sasuke held onto it for a few seconds. The flames went out, revealing a pillar of distorted glass that broke as soon as Gaara wrenched his arm free, exposing burnt skin and no sand. His gourd now fully dispersed into sand, rushing over his form and covering his arms, head, and upper torso, as he howled in agony. His torso was encased in a thick layer of sand, and his face had taken on the appearance of a rodent, complete with pointed ears. Naruto yelled, "Great, you just pissed him off," and raised his sword as Gaara roared and charged at them both, arms outstretched. Gaara simply crashed into some trees, his mass and momentum causing the trunks to break like kindling, while the other 2 barely avoided being tackled or pulled into a bear hug of death. When Sasuke saw that, he winced and stuck himself to a tree trunk with chakra. He questioned Naruto, saying, "What the hell are we dealing with?" Naruto was beginning to realize just how powerful Gaara was, so he watched her with increasing fear. He questioned Sasuke, "Do you know what a Jinchuriki is?" He turned back to Gaara upon seeing the Uchiha shake his head. "He has a Biju sealed inside of him. The Ichibi, to be precise. And now it's coming out," he explained. Gaping at him was Sasuke. "He has a Biju in him? How the hell is that possible? We need to beat him before he lets too much of its power out and he becomes next to unstoppable," Naruto said, watching Gaara emerge from the fallen trees. "That's not really something to focus on at the moment." "And how the hell do we do that? He's shrugging off everything we throw at him," asked Sasuke. Taking a deep breath, Naruto held onto his ninjutsu. With wind chakra gathering around the blade, he uttered, "Then we need to hit him harder," before lunging toward Gaara. Arena as he prepared to find his next opponent, Kakashi grunted as he snapped his opponent's neck and watched them fall lifelessly to the ground. He sidestepped as the green-clad Junin landed next to Kakashi, and a body shot past him, smashed into the wall by the force of one of Guy's kicks. "Ha! I'm up to 23 now, my youthful rival," a beaming Guy exclaimed, looking for a new foe as Kakashi followed suit. "Really? You're getting slower, Guy. I'm up to 25, Kakashi remarked, getting ready to battle an Oto Kunoichi nearby, his Sharingan visible. Guy's smile wavered briefly before resurfacing with gusto. He smiled and shot at Asuna Shinobi who wouldn't even know what hit him. "Then I shall simply have to turn it up a notch, won't I? Time to show our enemies their mistake in attacking our village," he said. Kakashi simply shook his head and threw a kunai at his opponent. The fight was soon over because his opponent, who was arguably no more skilled than a Chunin, had shown himself to be untough. He turned to find another opponent, but then scowled as he saw several bodies close by as he watched her slide to the ground, blood oozing from the lethal chest wound. At least 3 of the Suna or Auto Shinobi were dead from arrows protruding from their heads, necks, or chests. However, there was no doubt that 2 more had sustained sword wounds. As of now, Kakashi was aware of only 1 shinobi in Konoha who was proficient with both a sword and a bow, and Hinata was nowhere to be found. He dismissed it from his thoughts and continued battling another invader, resolving to look into it later if necessary. Anko, meanwhile, clenched her teeth and narrowly avoided taking another cut from her opponent's hand covered in chakra. Kabuto continued to use a kunai in his left hand while employing the chakra no Mesu in his right, enabling him to block her Ulak attacks with the kunai while making an attack with his right hand. Because of the way her blades were made, Anko had to get very close to slash and strike, which increased the danger and made it simpler for him to attack her with his chakra scalpel. He leaned back to avoid being kicked by her as she attempted to use her spin to kick him. He had missed by a few centimeters, but she had just enough strength to pull her leg away from his grasp before he could maim it. She swiftly retreated, being careful to keep a safe distance between Raphael and Kabuto because she knew her opponent would try to use him against her. Kabuto just grinned and went back to observing her. "You surprise me, Anko-san. I would have thought you'd never let anyone matter to you again after Orochimaru Sama betrayed you," he replied. "Then again, perhaps you recognize that he simply was abandoning a weak piece of trash who served no more purpose to him." Anko just held onto her Ulaks and observed him. "If that's your best taunt, then I almost want to pity that snake bastard, having to surround himself with witless morons like yourself." Kabuto hurried to get close to her again and said, "My dear, you have no idea what you're getting yourself into." She blocked his quick kunai strike, but he caught her off guard by dropping it from his left hand, releasing the chakra in his right, and grabbing the blade with his right hand before slashing suddenly with it. Barely could she draw back enough that the blade merely slashed her clothing, causing a tiny puncture in the material. With a sly grin, Kabuto's eyes widened as her foot suddenly snapped, sending him flying and hitting him in the face. He crashed into a wall, and Anko could only smile as he vanished, replaced by a log. Raphael yelled, "Anko, get behind you." Just in time, Anko parried what would have been a fatal blow. Even so, she was still hurt. The kunai had managed to sever her left shoulder, causing him to cry out in agony. She spun around to see Kabuto grinning. He asked her, "You do not think it would be that easy, do you?" She took a defensive stance, grimacing as she felt the pain in her left arm. Kabuto simply moved in and started assaulting her once more, this time with his chakra no Mesu active. Raphael winced as he saw Anko gradually pushed back until he was almost overpowered. She was slowing down a little from the injury to her left shoulder, and Kabuto looked just as fresh as he had when he and Raphael had fought. Although his left arm was crippled and his right arm was weak, he knew he had to try to help her even though he wouldn't be very effective in a straight-up fight. As he tried desperately to move his right hand toward his left in an attempt to form a hand sign, a desperate plan started to take shape. Anko winced as she used her left hand to seize Kabuto's right arm and stop him from striking. Still, she could feel the muscles in her arm twitch with disapproval. He yelled in shock and pain as she pulled him closer and slashed his arm with her Ulak in her right hand. She then cried out as he slashed her side with the kunai, hot pain shooting through her as blood spurted from the wound. Gasping for breath, she staggered back while straining to keep her wound closed. Glancing up, she saw Kabuto holding his right arm before he gave her a scowl. As she bit her lip in preparation for a last-ditch effort to break up the fight, he moved forward toward her. She gave a fast punch with her left hand as he approached, but he sidestepped it, and then her right arm struck out, revealing a hidden blade. As her blade pierced his flesh, she gave him a victorious look, but then grimaced when she realized she had missed his heart or other important spots. With a cry of agony, he grabbed her arm and pulled away from her blade, then struck with his right arm, the chakra scalpel severing the muscles and sending her screaming. He struck her in the chest with a kick, causing her to fall onto her back and turn away from him while expelling air from her lungs. With tears blurring her eyes, the purple-haired assassin could only whimper and groan in agony, barely able to breathe or think, as she saw Kabuto holding the chest wound and using a medical technique to slowly heal it. Now that the wound was healed, he advanced on her with a menacing smile that promised more pain. As she whimpered and struggled to move back, she heard what sounded like a thunderclap coming from behind Kabuto. His body stopped responding to his commands, and something exploded through his throat, spitting out blood, flesh, and bone as he went rigid and his eyes widened with shock. He collapsed forward, exposing two Raphaels standing behind him. The other was firing the hidden pistol on Raphael's bracer with his own right hand while the other was winking in agony and extending his right arm with a tiny cloud of smoke rising from around his hidden blade bracer. Dispersing, the second one revealed itself to be a shadow clone, and Raphael, panting and hurting, rose slowly to his feet and moved toward the downed Kabuto, kicking him onto his back. His eyes had lost most of their life, but there were still glimmers that suggested a part of him was holding out hope that he would live. With a grimace of pain, Raphael merely glared down at him while extending the hidden blade on his right arm. He spit out in Spanish, "Comete en el infierno, hijo de puta," and then stabbed Kabuto in the head to put an end to him, first of all. With his sword drawn from Kabuto's corpse, he bent down to try to reach Anko while heavily panting. He attempted to examine her wounds and asked, "Are you all right?" She gasped in pain and grimaced as she tried to stop the bleeding on her right side, saying, "I'll be okay. If we can get to a medic." As Raphael was about to rip a section of his robe to create an improvised bandage, someone yelled at them, warning them that an Auto shinobi was approaching. A flash of light revealed the headless corpse of the shinobi, which dropped to Raphael's feet as he scrambled to find anything to use as a weapon. The figure of Ryushi appeared a few feet away, brandishing a blood-stained ninjutsu that he had removed from a shinobi's corpse. After flicking the blade and wiping off most of the blood, he turned to face Anko and Raphael. He moved to Anko's side and swiftly applied the improvised bandage Raphael was going to use on her before getting up and offering Raphael his hand. "It seems you two need a hand," he said calmly. The assassin gave him a quick blink before grudgingly accepting the extended hand and being hauled up. He said, "How did? Who are you?" The hunter gave a headshake. "We can talk about that later. For now, we need to get you two out of here," he replied. After giving a slow nod, Raphael, Ryushi, and Anko carefully raised Anko to his feet and left the fighting to try to locate the closest medical professional. Sarutobi was on his knees on the arena roof, gasping for air as he supported himself with Enma. He had pushed his body to the limit and now it was at its breaking point. But the strength he once possessed had been stolen by old age. He didn't think he could have defeated all three of his opponents, even in his prime. However, he was aware that they would spread havoc among his shinobi if he failed to defeat them, and he didn't think anyone could stop Tama, especially the two undead Hokage. Their wounds had just healed, so all the damage they had taken had been for naught. They were still just as strong and powerful as before. Sarutobi eventually reached a decision and shook his head slowly. This battle could only end in one way. He was saddened by the fact that he would not be able to see his grandson again or see Naruto develop into the wonderful man he knew the boy could become, and that it would end with his death. But for Konoha, he knew he had to take this action. He stood up slowly, letting go of Enma's staff form with gentleness. He said, "Enma, thank you for your help," and started silently going through the hand signals. Enma scowled as he transformed into his monkey form and turned to face Sarutobi. He questioned, "What are you planning?" as Orochimaru and the two undead Hokage moved closer to him. Sarutobi simply smiled at him, exhausted. With a breath, he said, "I'm doing what I must, old friend," getting ready to start his last play's first scene. Jiraiya completed crafting a seal outside it. He muttered, "Hold on, sensei," as he was about to slap it against the barrier to break the seal. But before a bolt of lightning tore open a hole in the middle of the roof from below, Jiraiya and Sarutobi were both stopped by the roof appearing to tremble and shake. After 3 blurs, the Raikage appeared on the field with the help of Karabi and Darui, who were both brandishing blades, while it was encircled by lightning. At that, Orochimaru growled fiercely, leaving Sarutobi only able to blink in shock. "Idat-san, what are you doing here?" A simply smiled confidently at Sarutobi. He pointed to the two undead Hokage and said, "I realized that it would be quite nice to collect on the bounty Konoha has out on Orochimaru's head. Darui, Karabi, keep them distracted, will you? I want to have a nice chat with the snake." Just as Orochimaru opened his mouth, it appeared out of nowhere and then reappeared with his fist already embedded in Orochimaru's stomach. The blow nearly split the pale-skinned Auto leader in two, his mouth opening to let fly spit and his eyes going black, but the force of it sent him flying, crashing through one of the dense trees Hashirama had planted before slamming into another. A simply smiled as he moved forward, and Karabi jumped right into the fight against Tobirama, leaving Darui to deal with Hashirama. While the Sound Four nervously glanced at one another, maintaining their barrier but now fearing for the safety of their leader, Sarutobi simply stared in shock. Seeing this, Jiraiya quickly applied his seal and observed the barrier begin to dissolve. He yelled, "Anbu, with me." As he stepped through the barrier, the Anbu trailing closely behind. Jiraiya moved toward the undead Hokage in an attempt to help remove them from play, concentrating on Hashirama and Darui initially, while the Anbu darted towards their leader. I came to a stop close to the spot where Orochimaru had landed, the renegade Sannin embedded in a tree, either dead or unconscious. That is, until something began to crawl out of his mouth and his jaw unhinged. I snorted with disgust, seeing another Orochimaru crawl out and land on the ground while the first dried up and withered like an empty husk. Panting, Orochimaru slowly stood up and glared at A. "Why are you interfering? Damn you!" he yelled angrily. "You owe nothing to Konoha, why are you helping them?" A just grinned and prepared to fight, cracking his knuckles. "Simple. I find the idea of a fellow Kage being killed by a treacherous backstabbing coward to be disgusting. Even if I have no love for Konoha. And I could use the workout," he said. With a growl, Orochimaru tried to summon the two Kage to stand up for him. Hashirama did not appear, but Tobirama did appear shortly. That was until the Toad Sannin, with Jiraiya, Karabi, and Darui joining him, bearing a paralyzed Hashirama on his shoulder as a result of a seal he had applied. Smirking at Orochimaru, he dropped the paralyzed Edo Tensei to the ground. When Orochimaru gave him a glare, his four guards surrounded him and assumed defensive positions. They had removed the barrier since there was no longer any justification for maintaining it. They were now prepared to defend their master. Orochimaru knew he couldn't allow this to escalate into a fight, so he prepared his own stance and the others got ready to fight as well. He had used a lot of chakra to repair the damage caused by his fist, and as he continued to use the Edo Tensei technique, the chakra he had left was gradually being depleted. He realized the whole scheme was a fizzle and snarled with rage. He would never be able to kill Sarutobi, and the Konoha attack was also not working. Now all he could do was back off and try to get even later. He turned to face his elite guard, 6 armed men. "Kidomaru is a diversion," he remarked. "Yes, Orochimaru Sama," Kidomaru said, taking a sharp breath and hurling what appeared to be a massive spiderweb at the group of shinobi. Meanwhile, the Auto shinobi hastily withdrew as Tobirama readied himself to unleash another water jutsu. A charged forward, using his Raiden no Yoroi, lightning release armor, to appear in front of Tobirama, grabbing his arms and ripping them off as the assembled Kumo and Konoha shinobi sidestepped the spiderweb. The zombie Hokage staggered back, but Jiraiya moved behind him, sealing him in place with yet another seal that rendered him immobile. Tobirama and Hashirama both turned gray as they collapsed to the ground, their bodies vanishing into ash and exposing the horrifyingly lifeless faces of the other two Auto Genin, Kin and Zaku. Jiraiya merely growled in rage at that, witnessing his erstwhile ally and friend so ruthlessly sacrifice his own. After glancing at the two corpses and shaking his head sadly, Sarutobi arrived with the Anbu. He whispered, "I knew he had fallen, but this," and then raised his gaze to face the Raikage. Sana, I thank you for your assistance." A crossed arms, just nodded. After saying, "Just remember this, Sarutobi-san. I won't be so generous next time," he gestured for Karabi and Darui to follow, the 3 Kumo shinobi off. Sarutobi exhaled, sagging and on the verge of collapse due to a wave of fatigue. Jiraiya immediately caught up with his sensei and helped him to signal the Anbu. Then he created a shadow clone that nodded and hurried to the hospital, saying, "I need a sit-rep on the situation in the village. Go now, and report back to the tower." He looked over at Sarutobi. Quietly, "Let's get you to the tower where you can rest, sensei," he said. "The battle. I need to," Sarutobi uttered, before sagging even more and moaning. "You're not fit to fight. We'll take care of the village," Jiraiya remarked, turning to walk away from Sarutobi and toward the tower. The outskirts of Konoha with a grunt, Naruto crashed into a tree while trying to avoid another blow from Gaara. The half-transformed, insane Jinchuriki flew past him, raking the trees with his claws. With a few minor cuts on his right arm, Naruto cried out as the trunk struck him, the pain radiating through the wounds. He peeked out when he heard Gaara land and then the sounds of metal hitting sand. Sasuke had hurled 3 kunai, each marked with an explosive device. The tags caught fire as they struck Gaara's raised arm, engulfing the Jinchuriki in a massive explosion. When the smoke and flames subsided, however, they discovered that Gaara was largely unaffected by the explosion, with his sand arm absorbing the most of it and scattering some of it before it reformed. With a cry of anguish, rage, and bloodlust, Gaara turned and swept his arm, shooting sand projectiles in Sasuke's direction as he quickly ducked behind a tree. With a grimace on his face, Naruto lifted his crossbow and fired one of his few remaining bolts. With the help of wind chakra, the bolt gained more power and shot straight at Gaara, piercing his shoulder and sinking far enough into the sand to leave no trace behind. Gaara whirled, sending Naruto flying as his arm shot out and the sand extended, smashing through the tree. Before Naruto could do anything more, Sasuke grabbed him, grunting at the blow and ducking under cover. The Uchiha was gasping, blood oozing from two small wounds, one on his right leg, the other on his forehead. For both of them, the fight had not been going well. Everything they threw at him seemed to be easily overcome by his sand. And with every minute that went by and every blow he took, he became more and more angry and dangerous. With a wince, Naruto peered down at his healing arm wounds. "We must find a method to inflict significant harm on him," he uttered, casting a sidelong glance to locate Gaara. "Can you use that lightning ball jutsu of yours?" "Chidori, and yeah, I've got one more in me. But that's it, and I'm not sure I can hit him somewhere vital enough." "Not without a distraction," Sasuke said, turning to Naruto. "What about you?" Naruto enumerated his skills and jutsu before speaking. "I've got one jutsu that can maybe help. I just don't have it down quite yet," he stated, "so I wouldn't count on it." At that, Sasuke gave a quiet nod. "Alright then. Can you give me a distraction long enough for me to get a hit in there?" The blonde Jinchuriki nodded before unleashing a barrage of shadow clones that darted in all directions at Gaara, slicing through the air with sword, crossbow, shuriken, and kunai attacks. They were moving fast to prevent Gaara from being able to attack them, and he was growling in rage as they attacked him like wolves on a bear. Gripping his arm, Sasuke ran through the hand signals for his technique. He prepared himself and said, "I'll need you to keep him from seeing me coming, or he'll just swat me away." Naruto stood up and gestured to his clones with a nod. They united as a group and launched themselves at Gaara. He slashed through them with a vicious snarl, scattering them all in a massive cloud of smoke. He let out a triumphant roar, but he spun quickly when he heard birds screeching, realizing that Sasuke was approaching him using the screeching lightning technique. He attempted to strike Sasuke, but the Uchiha's Sharingan allowed him to see and dodge the arm, yelling as he propelled the Chidori ahead. Regretfully, he failed to hit the target. At the last second, Gaara managed to turn so that Sasuke's attack missed his chest and instead struck his side, grazing his skin with a drive through the sand. Gaara screamed in agony as Sasuke whizzed by him and skidded on the earth. After being shot by their own sibling, Temari and Kankuro had recovered enough to cower in the treetops, where they could still see everything but had retreated quite a distance. Both of them shuddered now, taking in the fight and what they had seen. With shock and fear in her voice, Temari questioned, "No way. How can they keep up with Gaara? How can they actually be challenging him?" Kankuro watched his younger brother with fear and said, "I don't know. But at this rate, you know what's going to happen. He'll let it out. We can't be here if that happens." Gaara turned to face Sasuke, his wound sealed as he growled, the sand already replenishing at his side. He swung both arms at Sasuke and yelled, "You want my blood, Uchiha? You can't have it. But I'll give mother yours." After the Uchiha avoided both of them, Gaara whirled around and smashed into Sasuke with sand shooting out of his back like a tail. Gaara looked around with excited cackles, but he let out a cry as he was slammed into a tree trunk, where the sand solidified and held him in place. He bellowed in a crazed manner, "Uzumaki! Come out and face me, or watch your friend die." As soon as Naruto heard Gaara, he shuddered and started to quickly consider his options. He possessed some wind and fire jutsu, but neither them nor his assassination methods were very effective against his opponent in this state. The Yondaime's jutsu was all that remained, along with the Rasengan and his doubts that his summons would be any use against Gaara. However, he had not yet completed it. He was unable to keep up the strength and control required to complete the technique. Every time he tried to touch it, it would either explode on him or die out. He had been working hard on it, and he knew it required focus, but not in this fight. There was no way he could get that kind of focus right now. And that's when he had his epiphany. His eyes went round, and he made the hand signal for the shadow clones in an instant, making 5 of them. While the other remained with Gaara. Nodding in comprehension, the other 4 hurried out to confront him. They got right to work, the 2 of them. Gaara smiled and shot sand projectiles at the 4 clones that were charging, easily taking out one of them. Reaching for his arms, 2 more struck with swords tinged with wind. The last one jumped into the air and slashed downward with his sword, leaving a long gash extending from the tip of his nose to his lower torso. He easily swatted them aside, scattering them, but that left him vulnerable. With a scornful backhand, the clone was scattered as the sword, despite the wind, was unable to sever through all the sand. Gaara noticed it, though, as the smoke began to clear. Standing side by side, two Narutos, one holding out his right hand while a chakra formed in it, the other controlling the chakra quickly, causing it to compress and spin into a ball. A booming noise was produced as the chakra ball coalesced into a solid ball of condensed energy in Naruto's grasp. He smiled as the clone shot forward, following closely behind it with the intention of distracting him. Naruto dove under and charged forward as Gaara snarled and shot both limbs out to catch them. However, the clone got in the way, grabbing onto both arms. He extended his hand and delivered a powerful Rasengan roar, driving the technique deep into Gaara's midsection. The chakra ball tore into the sand, blowing it everywhere as the technique's force propelled Gaara skyward. It struck exactly where the sand had been weakened and was still healing from the sword cut. The Jinchuriki tore through several trees before coming to a stop in one that had a huge crater that exposed the human torso beneath the layer of sand. Gaara was so shocked and hurt that his eyes were nearly blank, and he appeared to be on the verge of passing out from the injuries he had just sustained. He was panting and his head was hunched forward, desperately trying to inhale after the blow from the hammer that had forced all the air out of his lungs. Temari and Kankuro were both staring in dismay as they saw something unexpected happen to them once more. No shinobi had ever been able to hit Gaara before, much less injure him. Furthermore, Gaara had never been hit so hard in a single blow by an opponent. The blonde Jinchuriki stood there, panting, his arms still outstretched, and they both looked at Naruto with fear. When Naruto realized Gaara was temporarily out of commission, he turned to face Sasuke and approached him, desperately attempting to remove the sand from him. Throughout the entire ordeal, the Uchiha struggled, sensing that the sand was encasing and imprisoning him. He was unable to move his limbs sufficiently to try and dig his way out or make a hand signal, so he growled fiercely. Naruto was about to scratch away at the sand with his claws when he heard a dark laugh. It felt as though ice had suddenly started to form in his veins. Even as sand began to slowly fill in again over his chest, he turned his head and saw Gaara laughing. As Gaara threw his head back, the laughter turned to full-blown maniacal hysterics, and the ground erupted around him, forming more sand that surrounded him. The sand suddenly shot upward, forming into a massive, mountain-sized tanuki covered in the same tattoos that Gaara had in his partially transformed state. Yes, I knew it. That you would prove my existence," he exclaimed. "Come Uzumaki, come and let us finish this." Those who could see the forests from the village halted and gaped in shock as they witnessed this monstrosity emerge out of nowhere on the edge of the settlement. Fear took hold of the Suna shinobi who had not yet left the village and those who were outside it as soon as they realized what had happened. They wouldn't be safe in this village if Gaara had descended into that condition. They had to get away or perish. The shinobi from Konoha experienced fear as well, as flashbacks of the Kyuubi attack passed through them. Although many of the Oto shinobi were still terrified at the sight of the Jinchuriki, they were the least affected. Like their allies, Temari and Kankuro also desired to escape. Despite their proximity to the monster, they were unable to escape due to the overwhelming fear they felt. All they could do was gaze at what they perceived to be death personified. With wide blue eyes, Naruto gazed up at Gaara, horrified by the monstrosity that was engulfing the red-haired Jinchuriki. He watched Gaara slowly emerge from the center of the creature's forehead, his entire upper body appearing to grow out of it, and his gaze locked there. With a look of intense joy on his face, Gaara gazed down at him. He completed a single hand gesture and exclaimed, "Now Uzumaki, you shall feed mother with your blood." Tanuki Niri no Jutsu. Feigning sleep technique. Abruptly, Gaara fell forward, as if she was unconscious, and the monstrous creature's eyes glowed. Shukaku the Ichibi Biju exclaimed, "Ha! The little brat finally let me out to play. Now I can really have some fun," with excitement. With great anticipation, he spun around and fixed Konoha in his gaze. Shukaku yelled, "And there's my new playground. Here I come you bastards," as he began to arrive at the village. Watching the behemoth begin its march towards the village, Naruto shuddered. He could not allow it to get to Konoha. He had no idea who could stop it. He knew something had to be done, but he was at a loss as to how to stop that thing. There was only one trick left, and he wasn't sure if it would be enough to get him the win this time. He was aware that he had to give it a shot. Kyuubi? Within Naruto's mental realm, the Kyuubi grinned. "What do you want, ape?" "I'm enjoying watching my sibling about to go on a rampage," he said. "I'm contacting you for that reason. Please," Naruto thought desperately to him, "I need your help." "Would you like my assistance, or just my chakra?" Be honest now, Kyuubi mocked him. Despite the terms they had worked out, Kyuubi continued to irritate Naruto, in part because of his own resentment and rage and in part to see how committed Naruto was to the terms he had set. Please Kyuubi. Please help me. I don't know how I can defeat him, even with the power of your chakra. I need your help, Naruto pleaded to the Biju. I need your help, Kyuubi. Not just your chakra. The blonde brat truly meant it when he said he needed his help, and the Kyuubi frowned slightly at his words, sensing the truth and desperation in them. Letting out a sigh, he started to push what little of his chakra he could safely push through the seal. Your opponent had to render himself unconscious to unleash Ichibi's full power. It should destroy the construct and force my fellow Biju into his seal if you wake him up. The only way to get the kid to stop this fight and wake up is to hit him, maybe even killing him. I'll send you what chakra I have, and maybe that will be sufficient to reach him up there. I comprehend. And thank you, Kyuubi, Naruto mused, withdrawing from the connection as Kyuubi gave a quiet growl. What a bothersome brat. At this rate, you could earn my respect, he told himself. Jam Projects, the hero, too. Just as he opened his eyes, Naruto felt the full force of Kyuubi's chakra rising through his body. The unexpected burst of strength gave him a confidence boost, and he smiled, his red eyes and deepening whisker marks accompanied by a red aura of chakra surrounding him. Crouching down, he launched himself into the air, creating a crater in the process. Shukaku stopped and turned as the small red, cloaked figure approached him, his eyes locking on the sudden presence of a second source of Biju chakra. Ha ha, big brother Kurama's chakra. Yes, little brat, that's who you were hiding. Okay, I guess I can have a little fun with you, he yelled, blasting Naruto with a huge projectile of air out of his mouth. When Shukaku raised one giant arm and slammed it down towards Naruto, he flipped through the air to avoid it, bounding off of another tree top as he quickly approached Shukaku's legs, leaping onto one and using his chakra to stick as he started to run up the side of the giant sand tanuki. Naruto dodged the bullet by quickly leaping from tree top to tree top while charging towards the sand Biju. Snarling, Shukaku tried to swat Naruto off of him, but the blonde kept dodging his blows. Turning his attention inward, he tried to work the sand in front of Naruto, hoping to create a sand trap. Seeing the shifting sand, Naruto barely made it away in time, only to find more sand shifting as tendrils formed and lashed out at him, which he dodged and swiped at, the red chakra of Kyuubi easily burning through the sand tendrils, but the amount was overwhelming. Based more on instinct than actual knowledge, Naruto leapt off of Shukaku, throwing out one arm and creating a massive grapple-like arm of chakra that latched onto the Biju's arm, allowing him to swing through the air, using the momentum and swing to launch himself further onto Shukaku, landing somewhere on his upper torso and charging upwards again, creating several shadow clones that started to act as a screen, destroying sand tendrils and warning him of other traps. With one arm, Shukaku quickly reached up to try to sweep the swarm of Narutos off, but three of them grouped together and released a tremendous amount of chakra as they punched at the same time, managing to blast a hole through Shukaku's arm as it shot towards them, allowing the real Naruto to pass through unharmed. Shukaku grimaced though, already beginning to feel the slight aches that would start while he used the Kyuubi's chakra, his tolerance having grown over the course of his training, but he still only had a few minutes at most, so he knew he had to make the most of it. Now, with a wave of sand rising from his head towards Naruto's, Shukaku growled both angrily and worriedly. The clones, however, quickly grabbed the real one and threw him over the wave as they were flung off by it. Naruto landed, approaching his destination as he could see the unconscious redhead ahead of him. He growled and shot forward, not stopping even as he watched sand slowly start to rise to form a wall near Gaara to shield him. Still, Naruto wasn't going to let that stop him. Cocking his fist back, he poured as much chakra as he could into it before leaping forward. The redhead's eyes opened wide with shock and pain as he saw Naruto and Gaara fall, and Shukaku roared in pain and anger as his eyes dimmed. Time seemed to slow as his fist hit the sand wall, which resisted for only a second before being blown apart by his fist. The blow continued to travel forward, smashing into Gaara's jaw with enough force to rip him from Shukaku's forehead and send him flying. The two of them crashed into the treetops, with Naruto crashing through a few branches before he could catch himself and slow his fall, though he still hit the ground hard enough to break his left arm, making him cry out in pain. Gaara, too tired and stunned to catch himself, was able to avoid hitting the ground too hard, but only just in time to see the two combatants look at each other, panting for air, before Naruto slowly raised himself with his right arm, his clothes and assassin robes torn, blood seeping from multiple cuts and scratches from the fall, and his left arm hanging limp at his side. Despite all of this, Naruto advanced slowly on Gaara, his hidden blade extended, and the Suna Jinchuriki could only look up at him in terror. A part of them was screaming at them to run, to get away from this monster that had defeated their brother, to save themselves. And yet another part, small but still present, was yelling at them to go out and defend him. That despite everything he was still their brother. Temari and Kankuro, both surprised beyond belief that the Ichibi had been defeated, had managed to reach the crash site. Now both of them could only watch in fear and horror as Naruto advanced on Gaara. With fear in his eyes, Gaara shook his head and tried to tell his body to move so he could escape the approaching blonde, but he was unable to do so. Stay away from me. Avoid me at all costs. His eyes locked on that outstretched blade, he let out a terrified cry. After a few minutes, Naruto sat down next to Gaara, leaning against a tree with his blade retracted, and stood over him, staring down at him. There's a part of me that wants to kill you. You threatened the people I care about. You threatened me. You're my enemy here. By all rights, I should kill you, Naruto said. However, there's another part of me that always reminds me that I could have been you. Since learning you were a Jinchuriki, that thought has been in the back of my mind, he said quietly. That I may have become like you in the end. Alone, unwanted, and only motivated by rage, hatred, and violence. It could have been so easy. If Anko Sensei hadn't defended me. If Raphael Sensei decided not to teach me. If Hinata Chan decided she didn't want to be my friend. If I had grown up like you, with no friends, no loved ones, no one to protect, Naruto said softly, looking up at Gaara as her eyes widened. I could have been just like you. The funny thing is that you could have been like me, the blonde continued to say. The redhead said, What do you mean? After a few moments of stunned silence. At last, Gaara muttered, her gaze fixed on Naruto, who only responded with a worn out, hurt smile. You could have grown up like me if someone in your village had made a friend of you, the way my dear people did for me. It's very tragic that despite having family, you had no one. Unaware of the people around him listening to them and the impact of his words, Naruto said, I can't imagine what that's like, to have a brother and sister who are afraid of you, instead of loving you. Gaara considered what Naruto had said, slowly raising his head to the sky and staring at it. Would that have made me stronger? Silently, he questioned Naruto, would having others have made me stronger? I like to think so, Naruto said to him. There will always be someone stronger than you, but when you have someone worth fighting and dying for, I like to think that will be all the strength you'll ever need. Since they'll reciprocate the favor for you. I don't know if I can ever have that. I don't think anyone is willing to see me as someone worth fighting for, Gaara said, giving a quiet nod. When I was younger, my uncle attempted to kill me because he believed I was a monster and blamed me for my mother's passing. How can I be anything other than a monster? Gazing at Gaara with widening eyes, Naruto studied her for a few moments before slowly getting up and extending his right hand to greet her. Then I'll be the first, he said. Gaara's eyes widened as he stared at his hand before slowly taking it and grimacing as Naruto pulled him to his feet and supported him when his legs began to buckle. However, he was taken aback to find Kankuro supporting him on the opposite side. Kankuro? What are these? I'm helping my little brother, Kankuro muttered, trying not to show his tears. I'm doing what I should have done years ago. The two elder Suna genin looked down at their brother, who was staring at them in shock, and then slowly he looked to Naruto as the first glimmers of happiness, real happiness, appeared in those eyes. And me too, Temari said, moving towards them. She looked to Naruto, who nodded and stepped away, allowing her to take his place supporting Gaara's other side. He thanked Naruto-san before being taken away by his siblings. After watching them leave, Naruto began to groan and fall, but Sasuke caught him and grunted as he hit him. Easy there, Naruto said. I understand you. Looking up at Sasuke, Naruto blinked. Hey, glad to see you got free of the sand, he murmured, his eyes drooping with fatigue. Sasuke tried to encourage Naruto by saying, it dispersed the same time that giant sand monster did. Now, let's get you home. Yeah. That sounds good, Naruto said, leaning against him as they slowly returned to Konoha, unaware that the battle had ended with Shukaku's defeat and the Konoha invasion had come to an end. 3 days had passed since Otto and Suna's invasion of Konoha was repulsed, and the village was still recuperating. Even though Konoha had won, there had been a cost. Konoha had nearly 1,000 shinobi on active duty, from Genin to Junin, prior to the invasion. When the invasion started, about 10% of those shinobi had been sent on missions, border patrols, and undercover operations abroad, leaving 900 shinobi inside the village. First of all, Konoha was bloodied in the struggle against the invading forces. In addition to the countless civilians caught in the crossfire, 267 shinobi had either died or suffered injuries too severe to continue serving in the military. A further 100 or so shinobi had sustained varying degrees of injuries, but they would eventually be able to heal. With his cage hat lowered to shade his eyes, Sarutobi stood silently atop the Hokage tower, smoking his pipe and surveying the village that was still scarred from the attack. While supplies were being brought in to actually repair the wall, shinobi and civilian workers had been working non-stop to clear debris from the breach and erect a temporary fortification. As both shinobi and civilians lamented their fallen comrades, Anbu patrols relentlessly patrolled the village, hunting down any remaining spies or enemy agents. Even in the midst of their suffering and loss, Sarutobi couldn't help but experience a tiny twinge of pride. Even in situations where they possessed the element of surprise, they had dealt far bigger losses to their opponents. More than 200 Suna shinobi, 150 Oto shinobi, and at least 70 missing nin had so far been gathered into their corpses, making a total of over 400 enemy shinobi dead. Many of them had been killed by Jiraiya at the wall's opening, leaving behind blackened bodies that could only be identified by their smoldering forehead protectors or other personal belongings. That tiny glimmer of pride, though, was insufficient to lift his spirits. His failure had resulted in the loss of far too many lives. Orochimaru was the one who organized this invasion, assembled these troops, and deceived Suna into attacking Konoha. All because, all those years ago, Sarutobi realized his student's betrayal and chose not to take action, killing Orochimaru. Not only were all these deaths on his head now, but every new tragedy his former pupil caused would also be his fault because Orochimaru had escaped. With one last puff of smoke, Sarutobi addressed the figure that had materialized directly behind him. "What news?" he murmured. Jiraiya approached and stood next to his former sensei. Suna confirmed the death of their kage. They realized now they were tricked by Orochimaru. "My intel indicates they're planning to offer terms for their surrender to us," he said in a typically upbeat voice. Jiraiya of the Sannin, the lethal spymaster who kept an eye on Konoha's adversaries from the shadows, was now this. Sarutobi just continued to gaze over the village, observing the people below in silence. "And Orochimaru?" he inquired. Jiraiya was a little hesitant to answer. "Escaped. I managed to follow his trail towards the north, but by the time I reached the Valley of the End, they were already over a day ahead of me. I have sources up north on the lookout for him, but I think it's safe to say he's back in whatever hole he crawled out of." Sarutobi simply nodded quietly while puffing on his pipe. Then, he took it out and sighed with exhaustion as he turned and began to slowly make his way back to this office. Silently, Jiraiya followed him inside, where Sarutobi took a seat behind his desk. He stood up and sat down across from Sarutobi. "What about Kumo? Have you decided what to do on that front?" he inquired. Taking a report out of the stacks of papers piled on his desk, Sarutobi scowled. It was a description of what had transpired during the invasion by Hinata Mitarashi, Hitomi, and Hanabi Hyuga. The report also included Ibiki's discovery from the attacker that Hinata had left unconscious, which showed that the man and his companion were both Kumo shinobi with Chunin ranks. This infuriated Sarutobi even more since it revealed to him the truth about his charitable aid in the fight against Orochimaru. It was just an attempt to make him feel responsible for the Raikage's rescue of him. Sarutobi nodded, putting down the report and turning to face Jiraiya. "We sadly do not have enough evidence to use against Kumo, or else I'd be calling for a meeting of the 5 Kage to bring full sanctions down upon Kumo. However, I will not sit by this time. I've already entreated the daimyo to ban any and all Kumo shinobi from setting foot inside Hai no Kuni, as well as setting up increased tariffs against merchants from Kaminari no Kuni. If their daimyo has any problems with this, I'll be happy to direct him towards A for answers." Sarutobi replied quietly. "I also want you to see about getting hold of any documentation inside Kumo itself linking them to this newest attack. If we can find proof that they can't claim we fabricated or tainted, we can perhaps finally put Kumo in their place." Jiraiya silently nodded. Thanks to the skills of some of their clans, Kumo could easily assert, in the absence of indisputable proof, that any evidence Konoha attempted to present was tainted or fabricated. It would have been easy for Yamanaka shinobi to plant the evidence inside the shinobi's head and coerce them into making false admissions. One could have used the Uchiha Sharingan to coerce an official into writing a document or to replicate his handwriting and forge it instead. What they required was indisputable proof, like a handwritten note bearing the Raikage's seal, signed by A or another powerful and well-respected member of Kumogakure's leadership. Though the Hai no Kuni daimyo had the last say in these matters, Konoha did at least have sufficient evidence to impose these personal sanctions on Kumo. Sarutobi put down the report and looked out the window. It is fortunate that young Hinata observed the kidnappers leaving the arena. Had she not been there, I shudder to think what would have happened to her mother and sister, and what it would do to Hinata if she learned they had been kidnapped. Jiraiya observed his sensei with a frown. He inquired, "What do you mean?" He knew all about Hinata's banishment because it was the worst kept secret in Konoha, and he knew how shocking it was to watch the paranoid Hyuga banish one of their own. He was only aware of the girl's apparent close relationship with Naruto and another assassin, and that was about all the information he knew about her. Hitomi and Hanabi Hyuga are probably the only two Hyuga that Hinata cares about anymore, Sarutobi replied quietly. Those two are the only blood family she actually cares about, and if they were taken away, how do you think she'd react? With a silent wince at the thought of the trauma the former Hyuga would experience, Jiraiya nodded. I'm betting old Hiyashi is feeling pretty foolish right now. He banished his daughter, only for her to show him and his clan up not once, but twice in the same day. Sarutobi laughed hysterically and then sighed with exhaustion. Indeed. I will need to watch the Hyuga clan carefully for their reaction, he said. Jiraiya, I think it is time. Even though Jiraiya knew what Sarutobi was going to say, he still asked, time for what? Sarutobi continued to gaze out the window. Time for me to retire again. I can't do this anymore, Jiraiya. I'm too old to keep protecting this village as its Hokage. The village needs someone younger, faster, stronger. Someone who can defend it, both through words and through action. The elderly Hokage repositioned his chair so that it faced his pupil. I've been thinking it over the past 2 days. I already have a list of the best candidates, he stated. Jiraiya laughed and said, well, I'll be sure to give them my condolences. Sarutobi corrected Jiraiya, saying, you're one of the first 2 on the list. Jiraiya no longer laughed. The spymaster simply looked in shock at his sensei. Are you serious? As the dead last screw up, me as Hokage? Jiraiya asked, attempting to catch him off guard. Sarutobi gave a headshake. You are one of Konoha's strongest shinobi. You have been loyal to this village, have defended it, and have proven resourceful and skilled. Jiraiya just gave him a startled look and shook his head. He muttered, thinking of a godson he needed to start making amends to. I can't, sensei. I've still got the spy network I need to maintain, and even if there wasn't that, I have things I need to do first. Sighing, Sarutobi looked at his student while curving his fingers. You know who the other top choice is. Do you really think she would be any better? He inquired. With a quiet frown, Jiraiya considered the person his sensei was referring to. Sarutobi nodded as he trailed off, saying, I think that if she was properly convinced, she'd make a better choice than me. She always did care about helping people, before. Perhaps. And we certainly could use her help here, even if she wasn't to take up the mantle of Hokage very well then. We'll need to find her though, in order to offer her the position, Sarutobi replied. Jiraiya nodded at Sarutobi. Give me 3 days to get things in order and get info from some contacts, and I'll go find her, he said. And I want to take someone with me. Letting out a sigh, Sarutobi knew instantly what Jiraiya was planning. Naruto winced in the hospital, feeling another itchy spot beneath the cast covering his arm. Even with Kyuubi's chakra, his own genetics, and the efforts of the medical staff, the majority of his other injuries had already healed, but a broken arm took time to mend. Medical jutsu has made it possible for most broken bones to heal completely in a week, albeit more complicated breaks require more time and effort to heal. This is especially true for simple and clean breaks. He tried to ignore the itching by staring out the hospital window at the unclouded blue sky. He could see some of the damage the village had sustained during the battle, as well as part of the village outside. He briefly closed his eyes as he felt a twinge of guilt for being relieved that none of his teammates or friends had perished in the fighting or suffered lifelong injuries. While he was away fighting Gaara, he had been concerned that something might have happened, but everyone survived the invasion largely unharmed. After he had been placed in a room to rest and recover, Hinata had come to see him and then told him what had happened. With the exception of herself, Yugito, Iruka, Kaseki, and Ino had all survived the invasion with only minor wounds. For most of their fellow genin, the same was true. The only people with significant injuries were Raphael and Anko, but Hinata reassured him that they would survive. Hinata's voice was very clear when she mentioned that Anko would recover completely. Given that those two constituted the closest thing he had to a family, Naruto could appreciate her relief. Since that day, when he had stood up for Hinata against those bullies, and Raphael had stood up for him in return, both of them had supported him. He was plagued by the fear of losing them, either to death or catastrophic injuries. He had not had time to visit them yet, as they were still recovering from their wounds and would need to be in the company of visitors for a day or two, which he was very much looking forward to. Naruto's right fist clenched as he considered their injuries, but he slowly released it. He was relieved that the idiot who had injured them had perished, presumably at Raphael's hands. Anko didn't deserve any more suffering from Orochimaru, she had already endured enough. His stomach growled and he sagged back into the bed, grimacing at the thought that lunch would probably be served shortly. A prospect he didn't particularly look forward to because hospital food wasn't particularly tasty, despite being nutritious. Especially after spending 3 days in the hospital, ramen would be very welcome. He heard the door open and looked up, grinning to see Yugito standing there holding a food delivery case. Making an effort to sit up more, he asked, "Yugito ne-chan, what are you doing here?" She held up the food and said, "Saving you from hospital food. Ichiraku ramen, relatively fresh." When Yugito set up a tray for him, Naruto began to drool even more than he had when he heard that. With one arm incapacitated, he grimaced at how much she had to do for him, but before long, he was eagerly digging into the bowl of ramen with chopsticks in hand. I'm grateful, ne-chan, he exclaimed. Yugito simply grinned and then sighed. "I actually came for more than just that. Hokage Sama is a bit worried about how much of Kyuubi's chakra you used during your fight with Gaara. He wanted me to check on you," she said with a smile. With a slight grimace, Naruto finished the current mouthful of noodles. "I'd be lying if I said I was fine afterwards," he replied. "I felt like my whole body was burning up, on top of the exhaustion and other injuries I sustained. It probably didn't help that I used shadow clones while using his chakra, that probably forced some more out than was expected. But I feel fine now, at least on that front." Yugito listened to him, quietly nodding. "It's to be expected, honestly. Even if Kyuubi is voluntarily giving you his chakra, you're not synced or bonded with him. That is how both I and Kurabi learned how to use our Biju's chakra. We didn't really try using their chakra until we had a good bond with them, one of respect and even friendship. Trying to use their chakra without that, you're going to have to work to build up a tolerance to the negative feel of it. Biju chakra is strongly tied to the emotions of the Biju wielding it. The more negative they feel towards their host, the more toxic the chakra can feel to you. I honestly would have preferred waiting till you had a stronger bond with Kyuubi before you started using his chakra." Quietly, Naruto shrugged. "I probably would have preferred it that way too, but Senin seems to think that I need to start using his chakra now. The least I can do now is try to prove I'm worthy to Kyuubi, and hopefully he'll be more willing to help me." Naruto looked away thoughtfully as she continued, "Well still, it was quite impressive what you did. With your level of training, defeating the Ichibi and Gaara is quite impressive. Something wrong?" In a quiet voice, he said, "I just hope Gaara is okay. I know that probably sounds weird, Buddha. I really think I understood him there, when the fight was over. He was just like Maya. He was what I could have become, if Raphael and Anko hadn't come into my life. Now well, I'm honestly hoping he can maybe finally have what I have." He looked up at her as Yugito put a gentle hand on his shoulder. "I'm sure he'll be fine. Especially if he's got you now as a friend," she continued. After nodding, Naruto leaned back. He looked at her and said, "The fight with him made me realize something though. I need to work on my ninjutsu skills. I can't rely on my assassin skills to win every fight. The only thing I had that hurt him was the Rasengan. Nothing else worked." The Jinchuriki from Nibi nodded. "You're right, Naruto. There's going to be some opponents out there you can't beat as an assassin. Stealth and surprise can win you a battle before it begins, but if your opponent is skilled enough to detect you, and can protect themselves from your hidden blade and other weapons, it's always good to have ninjutsu to fall back upon." Naruto remarked, "I guess I'll have to pay more attention to the perverted toad's lessons then, before returning to his meal. Thanks again for the ramen." Yugito gave him a warm smile and tousled his hair. She said, "You're welcome," observing him attempt to pout while holding a slice of pork and multiple noodles in his mouth. Hyuga Estate, one of the prominent members of the Hyuga clan's main family, yelled, "This is unacceptable, Hiyashi. That girl has made a mockery of us twice over." At the moment, Hiyashi, the other leading members, and the elders were debating the events of the Chunin exam finals and the invasion that followed. With the exception of a few members who were hurt in battle, the Hyuga clan had suffered little during the invasion itself. Instead, the majority of the clan demonstrated their strength and power by driving out multiple invaders who had attacked the clan home. But one Hinata Mitarashi's actions soured their victory and any pride they may have had in it. Now another member of the clan spoke up. She not only humiliated us publicly by defeating the most promising young member of the clan, but then to have to be in debt to her for protecting your wife and daughter dishonors us all. Sitting at the head of the group, Hiyashi kept an eye on everyone. The only thing keeping him from expressing his frustration was his years of training and manners. He experienced the emotions they were describing on a more intimate level, so he was all too familiar with them. His banished daughter had exposed him to the public. The story of the Hyuga banishing one of their own had gone viral, so it was no secret what had happened to the young girl. It was a very uncommon event that could not be suppressed or kept under wraps. Everyone was aware that Hinata Midarashi was formerly Hinata Hyuga and that the Hyuga clan had decided she was so weak and useless that it would be embarrassing for them to keep her in the clan. That same girl had vanquished the star of the Hyuga clan's new generation in battle in front of clients and nobles from all across the elemental nations. She had declared to everyone in attendance that the Hyuga had been mistaken about her in this action. That the clan had erred in judgment. It was a blow to the Hyuga's reputation as a formidable clan, which in turn was a blow to their authority and influence. Even though her actions to save Hitomi and Hanabi were private, they nonetheless brought a more intimate level of shame upon the clan's leaders. If not for the shamed outcast's actions, they had almost lost both their bloodline and the clan's heiress to Kumo. Twice, she had brought them low once in front of the entire village, and again by preserving their lineage and clan members. Hiyashi acknowledged this, but he now made it clear that not much could be done. Asking everyone in attendance, "What would you have me do?" He silenced them. "What can we do? She is not part of the clan, nor has she done anything that harms us that would give us cause to legally act against her. She is a kunoichi of this village and is thus protected by the laws and rights granted to the shinobi of Konoha. So, what would you have me do?" One of the elders said, "We cannot allow this humiliation to go unanswered. There must be something we can do." To which the oldest elder interrupted with a throat clearing. Father of Hiyashi and Hizashi Hyuga, Hiroto Hyuga, turned to face the audience before continuing. "The solution is one I'm not eager to speak of, but it would seem to be the best course of action. We must appear humble, offer an apology to the girl, and offer to bring her back into the clan," he stated simply. At once a number of other clan members raised their voices in opposition to such an action. Speaking up was one of the female members. "You cannot be serious. We cannot commit ourselves to such an act. It would be weakness on our part. To not would be nothing more than stubbornness. If we appear to be humble, offer her an apology and a chance to return to the clan, we can save face, rather than refusing to acknowledge the situation and reacting with only pride and stubbornness. Once she is a part of the clan again, we can attempt to again properly educate her as a Hyuga. If she succeeds, we shall empower the clan, and in so doing, gain more respect than before. And if she again shows the weakness that she had before, her inability to properly utilize the Hyuga arts at this time, we can have better control over her if we keep her within the clan. After all, accidents can happen during training sessions, after all," Hiroto said quietly. This reasoning calmed the other clan members' earlier indignation as they turned to face one another. Although some were still unsatisfied with the idea, they were unable to argue with the elder's logic. Hiyashi looked to the different clan members and nodded in agreement. "Are there any opposed to this course of action?" he inquired. He nodded when nobody replied. "Then it is decided. We shall wait till order has been restored to the village, and then make the offer to the girl." Now an elder raised his voice. "And what of Neji? He was responsible for publicly bringing shame to the clan," he said. Hiyashi faced the older person. "I have already assigned him to perform menial tasks for the clan when he is not training or on missions with his team. I have authorized the use of the seal on him as a reminder of his place, so long as he is not left unable to perform his duties as a Konoha shinobi. I believe that is sufficient punishment at this time," quietly he replied. "If there is nothing else, you are all dismissed." After the different attendees of the meeting left, Hiroto went to Hiyashi's office. When the door was shut, he said something. "Curious," he said, "speaking of Neji, do you still plan to give him his father's letter?" With a small frown, Hiyashi fixed his gaze on the scroll that was positioned on his desk. After the finals, he had planned to present it to Neji, but the combination of the invasion and his shocking loss to Hinata had made him forget about it. He had not had much time to consider it until now, what with everything else that had been going on. He weighed the scroll in his hand as he picked it up. Since his brother had not sealed the letter and had given it to Hiyashi to give to Neji when the boy was old enough to understand, he was aware of what his twin had left behind in it for Neji. But Hiyashi was apprehensive to give it to Neji. It is likely that Neji's faith in fate would be severely shaken if he were to read the letter and discover that his father had chosen his fate. If he knew his father chose to go rather than being forced to, his resentment of the main family might subside. However, Hizashi's words might give the boy the notion that he is not destined to serve the main family and that he could try to rebel against them. Neji was a shinobi of Konoha, so the seal could still restrain him, but there was only so much they could do to him before the Konoha leadership got involved. Hiyashi was aware of a leadership that despised the Hyuga clan's usage of the caged bird seal and was keen to find a means to obstruct its application. At last, Hiyashi put the scroll down. I do not believe it is a wise idea to give the scroll to the boy until I know his temperament. Hisashi's words could cause him to become more rebellious towards us. I do not wish to see him grow wild and uncontrollable, forcing us to take measures that will cripple his ability to gain fame and renown for the clan, Hiyashi stated. When I know the boy is more loyal to the clan, then I shall give him the letter. Hiroto gave that a nod. A wise course of action. There is already too much strife and discord going on now, without us adding to it, he said as he bowed. I shall leave you to your duties then. The old man unlocked the door and walked out, not even bothering to look at Hitomi's kneeling figure by the door. Hiyashi motioned for his wife to come in. She did so slowly, pulling the door shut behind her as she bent to greet him. She said softly, "You summoned me, Hiyashi. Sama?" "Yes. I am placing Hanabi strictly in your care for the time being," Hiyashi stated to her. "With the chaos of invasion and everything else, I find myself too busy to continue her training. And she seems to be suffering from the incident," he stated. Over the last 3 nights, Hanabi had had very little sleep, if any at all, due to terrible nightmares brought on by the death and destruction, along with the near capture by Kumo. I want you to do your best to comfort her and see that she recovers from what happened. Hitomi lowered her head once more. Hashi. Sama, of course, she uttered. When she saw him brush her off, she quietly left the room. She was trained to wear a passive mask, so as she walked away, her thoughts were concealed. Being able to spend more time with Hanabi made her happy as she tried to help her daughter retain some of her inner child. However, she was also grieved to learn that her daughter was in pain and that her father only seemed concerned with giving Hanabi to someone else to fix the issue. But while she waited for Hiroto and Hiyashi to conclude their conversation regarding the letter that Hisashi had left for Neji, her thoughts were also replaying what she had heard. She believed that since this should have been Neji's for a while, it was improper of them to deny it to him. It was their duty to give the boy the letter. The boy deserves to receive the letter, somehow. She stopped, and as a rebellious thought crossed her mind, her eyes widened. She could deliver the letter to him. She shook her head, laughing at the very notion of acting in such a foolish manner. However, a tiny rebellious part of her, born from witnessing her eldest daughter grow into a fearless and strong kunoichi, couldn't help but cling to that thought and keep it in the back of her mind. Maybe it wasn't such a terrible idea after all. Unknown place. A cloaked figure stood on a pedestal in a pitch black room, staring at nothing with rings around her grayish-purple eyes. It would appear that way to someone else in the room, at least. Actually, he could see several other dark figures wearing cloaks thanks to the pedestal. When the figure realized they were all there, he raised a manly voice. Our spies have verified that the invasion on Konoha by our former associate Orochimaru was thwarted. All 3 Jinchuriki survived the conflict. Our plan has not been compromised. A hunchbacked figure among them spoke in a gravelly, deep voice. We should deal with Orochimaru before he proves to be a bigger threat than he already is. He knows our plans, our targets, and if we don't stop him he'll do his best to undermine us for his own gains. Another took a triple bladed scythe and said, "Let me do it, leader. Sama. I'll fuck the fucker up and sacrifice his shit. Stained snake soul to Jashin. Sama." The leader turned to face 2 of the other shadowy figures and said, Orochimaru is not our concern at this moment. We shall deal with him later. For now, it is time to begin the next phase of our plan. One was enormous, with short, spiky hair, beady eyes, and a blade hilt protruding over his shoulder. The other was shorter, and the red eyes of the Sharingan were all that was visible. You 2 will go to Konoha now. Scout out the Kyuubi Jinchuriki. If he has grown strong enough to defeat a fellow Jinchuriki, we may need to intercede before he can grow stronger. The other shadowy figures spoke first, and the 2 of them just bowed before they faltered and vanished. On a tiny hill in Hai no Kuni, Itachi Uchiha gradually parted his hands, breaking the hand seal that concentrated his chakra and enabling him to converse with the other members of Akatsuki. He stood up slowly and turned to face Kisame Hoshigaki, his companion. The 2 men wore similar long, sleeved black cloaks with red clouds embroidered on them and crimson lining along the collars and cloak openings. Additionally, each person wore a forehead protector that displayed their missing nin status as a line slashed through their village's emblem. Kisame was from Kirigakure no Sato, and Itachi was from Konoha. But this was the extent of the similarities. Kisame had a tall stature, standing nearly 7 feet tall, with light blue skin, shark-like eyes, teeth in his smile, and gill-like markings on his cheeks. His hair was straight and spiky, with a darker shade of blue. A yellow hilt with a pattern resembling scales and a small pommel shaped like a skull was slung onto his back. The weapon itself was covered in bandages, forming a long, broad shape that was maybe a foot or so shorter than Kisame's height, so it was unclear what the hilt was attached to. Kisame groaned, feeling a joint or two pop as he stretched his back. He asked his stoic companion, "Well, guess we're heading back to your old stomping grounds, Itachi. Are you feeling nostalgic?" Itachi remained silent as he picked up a large straw hat in the shape of a cone and placed it over his head to cover his face from the shadow it created. Kisame just laughed and took hold of his own hat, trailing Itachi as he put it on. "Always the silent one. Maybe that's why I like working with you." Konoha, after 4 days with a slight grimace, Naruto carried on flexing his left arm and hand in the manner instructed by the doctors to make sure everything was functioning as it should. The day before, he had been released, at last free to go home, albeit with a warning to try not to put too much strain on that arm for a week. After returning home and taking a shower, Naruto changed into new clothes and headed straight back to the hospital to finally see Anko and Raphael. Anko had made a rather emphatic request for them to share a room, so they ended up in the same recovery room, which allowed him to see them both at the same time. He had been concerned about them despite Hinata's comforting words and was relieved to hear from their own lips that they would recover completely. Unfortunately, the doctors had to use chakra techniques to internally sew their muscles back together in order to repair the damage caused by Kabuto, which made their injuries more delicate and took longer to heal. Anko had also lost a good bit of blood, but happily they arrived at a doctor's office in time to save her further loss. Naruto grinned, recalling the conversation that ensued after surprising them both with hugs. Retrospection. Anko blushed slightly at Naruto's embrace of her, asking, "Not that I'm complaining, Gaki, but what's with the hug?" Raphael blinked, equally perplexed by the hug he had just received in front of her. After giving her a hug, Naruto slowly withdrew, lowering his gaze slightly. He said in a low voice, sounding both scared and embarrassed, "I just was really worried. Why? You two are the first people who truly care about me, and you're like family to me." "I know that sounds pathetic," he began, but Anko grabbed him with her left arm and pulled him into another hug, making him gasp. Raphael smiled softly as he managed to slip out of the bed, gently ruffling Naruto's hair with his right arm because his left arm was immobilized completely and Anko had a similar cast on her right arm. "We're fine, Naruto. All right. Don't worry about it," Anko said reassuringly, smiling a little as she held him close. "Naruto, I don't think it sounds pathetic at all," Raphael murmured, turning to face Anko. "In a way, we've all become a family for each other. So, we understand," he said quietly. With a small smile on his face, Naruto gave Anko another hug before eventually stepping away. "Thanks guys," he said, dabbing at the moisture in his eyes. "So how long are you both stuck in here?" he inquired. Raphael grinned and looked at Anko, who blushed but smiled back. "A week or two probably. They need to make sure they fixed everything, and our muscles are working properly. So, we're stuck here for a while." "Not that I'm complaining since I have some lovely company," Raphael said, smiling. "Flatterer. Though it is very nice to have such a handsome roommate," she replied. Naruto laughed a little at their antics during it all. "Oh, shut up Gaki, you'll be the same with whatever girl you fall for and you know it." After chuckling at that, Naruto sighed softly, relieved to see that they were both okay. Just to scream when Anko abruptly put handcuffs on his head. She glared at him and demanded, "Now what the hell is this I hear about you fighting a damn Biju?" At that, Naruto winced slightly and rubbed the back of his head while laughing shyly. He looked awkward as he began, "Well you see," and then went on to describe what had happened. Flashback comes to an end. They had both listened to his account of the battle with Gaara. Even though they had to stop him, Anko chastised him for hurrying off with Sasuke after Gaara. Nevertheless, they were both impressed by his skill and the specifics of how he vanquished the awakened Shukaku. Even so, Anko forced him to swear that the next time he would enlist the aid of a stronger shinobi, particularly after he revealed to them that he had accomplished very little against Gaara. Raphael was impressed by Naruto's maturity in accepting his shortcomings and his desire to improve his fighting style by incorporating ninjutsu. Additionally, Naruto had used that opportunity to act on a long-standing thought of his. He had occasionally scribbled ideas for his robes, as well as new potential equipment and weaponry, back at the academy. Much of it was unrealistic, the thinking of a small child still developing. However, He showed Raphael a few designs that he felt actually had potential and gave him an explanation of. If not all the assassins, Raphael had believed that one of them would make a great addition to Naruto's weaponry. After hearing his justifications and looking over the preliminary drawings, Raphael finally consented to allow Naruto to work with Gonzo to commission a prototype in order to test the viability of this design. He was now going to this location to talk about the design and retrieve his armor and weapons that had been fixed. Following his conflict with Gaara, Hinata arranged for the necessary repairs to be made to his robes and equipment. Hinata had no trouble patching up the robes and dropping them off at Naruto's apartment, but it had taken longer to get the equipment. He grinned as he entered Gonzo's shop and saw the blacksmith silently honing a sword behind the counter. When Gonzo noticed Naruto, he smiled back. He put down the blade and grabbed a bundle from behind the counter. He grinned and said, "I got your gear right here, Naruto," placing everything on the counter. "All good as new and should serve you well. Provided you don't go fighting any sand-wielding tanuki again." Naruto laughed at that while examining the equipment. Sated with the way his gear looked, he said, "Thanks, Gonzo-san. Trust me, I'm in no rush to fight that kind of enemy again." He took out his toad-shaped wallet and placed one of the design sketches on the table in addition to a stack of bills on the counter. "I wanted to talk to you about this. It's a possible upgrade for the bracer. Raphael Sensei gave me permission to get a prototype made, to see if it would work." Gonzo took a look at the rough sketch. Gazing at Naruto, he said, I see then. You came up with this?" Naruto nodded in response. "If it works, you can pay me then," he stated, taking the design. "I'll see about making a prototype attachment for you to test out. And don't worry about leaving one of your bracers here. I've got a mock-up in the back I used to test out some designs of my own. I'll use that to help me make this." With a grateful nod, Naruto gathered his equipment. "Thank you, Gonzo-san. Any idea when it'll be done?" Gonzo, who was already taking notes while examining the sketch, stated, "Give me 3 weeks to work on it. I should either have a working prototype by then or run out of options for making a working one." With a laugh, Naruto dropped his equipment into his arms. Though he had only taken 10 steps, a figure with a cheerful grin on his face landed next to him. Jiraiya gave Naruto a hearty back slap and exclaimed, "Naruto, there you are, my boy." After blinking, Naruto nodded his head. He called her, Arrow Senin, which caused Jiraiya to wince. "You're looking for me?" Jiraiya, whining, "Come on kid, can't you show me a little more respect now? I heard you only beat that Gaara kid because of the training we were doing." Naruto merely rolled his eyes. Jiraiya let out a sigh of resignation and followed Naruto, who had resumed walking. "And I'm thankful for that, but until you stop acting like an Arrow Senin, I'm going to call you Arrow Senin," Naruto said. Jiraiya stopped Naruto and turned, frowning slightly. Fine. I just wanted to let you know though that you and I have a mission," Jiraiya said. Confused, he said, "We have a mission? The two of us?" As anything involving Jiraiya was probably very high level and very important to the village, he wasn't sure what mission could possibly require him and Jiraiya to work together. "Yep. Well, to be fair, I could probably do this mission alone, but I could use an extra pair of eyes on this mission. And I thought I might continue training you like I have so far. I can help you keep working on your fuinjutsu, and I've got some more ninjutsu I can show you, if you're interested," Jiraiya replied. With a frown, Naruto turned to face Jiraiya. "So, you're taking me along because you want to teach me? Not because I can actually help the mission?" he inquired. The elderly toad sage waved his hands hastily. "Oh no, you can still help on the mission. We're going to be looking for an associate of mine, and as I understand it, part of your training involves tracking, right?" Naruto said, seeming a little suspicious. "Yeah, but Hinata-chan is better than me, thanks to her Byakugan. And there are other shinobi even better than us at it. Like the Inuzuka clan. But none of them are somebody I'm already training. Come on, it'll be a good experience. Besides, the person we're going to find could help speed up the recovery of your sensei. She's a world-renowned medic. Nin, Jiraiya replied. Naruto scowled at him a little. After saying, "I know what you're doing, and that's low," he let out a sigh. "But I'm guessing that I really can't say no, can I? When do we leave?" "I'll give you a couple hours to get your stuff packed. This will be a long-term mission, as my associate does move around a lot, so we'll need to follow her trail to try and catch up to her. I'd suggest packing for at least a month," Jiraiya replied. After nodding, Naruto hesitated. Holding up his left arm, Naruto remarked, "Are we expecting any fighting on this trip? Because I barely got out of the hospital and I'm supposed to take it easy with this arm." Don't worry, we'll do our best to avoid conflict and just do light training to give your arm time to heal. But you should know that any mission can result in combat. Don't assume this will be a smooth and easy mission, Jiraiya replied. After giving a nod, Naruto created several shadow clones. Go tell the others what's going on, he commanded, watching as they hastily fled in various directions in search of his friends and fellow assassins. He turned and nodded at Jiraiya. I'll meet you at the main gate. Jiraiya grinned somewhat longingly as she watched Naruto go off. There had been a brief moment when he thought of Minato. The boy had always had the ability to switch between being joyful and carefree in an instant. Though he occasionally displayed his mother's wild disposition and silly antics, Naruto also appeared to notice that. He turned to inform Sarutobi that they would be departing shortly and shook his head. Sasuke was grunting elsewhere as he worked on the accuracy and quickness of his taijutsu by attacking a training post with a barrage of punches and combos. Despite the padding being added, the post was dented underneath, and he had bruises on his fists and legs from repeatedly hitting it, but he continued to train despite his muscles screaming in pain. He was unable to quit training. He had to keep working out and challenge himself to get better. Along with Naruto, his fight with Gaara had opened his eyes greatly. Despite having the same rank as them, Gaara had proven to be a formidable foe in both metaphor and actuality. In that battle, Sasuke had given it everything he had in an attempt to stop Gaara, but all he could manage was wounds. Not even enough to stop him or even slow him down. Subsequently, he found himself imprisoned, helpless against Gaara and his sand. Had Naruto not intervened and defeated Gaara, the Tsunade Jinchuriki might have killed him. Sasuke paused for a moment to consider that. Naruto had much more going on than met the eye. Aside from their sparring matches during taijutsu training, Sasuke had not really paid much attention to him during the academy. Sasuke had never truly believed Naruto was superior to him, even though Naruto had been a competent sparring partner at the time. However, things took a turn for the worse in Nami when Naruto held his own during their team's sparring matches. Sasuke somehow sensed that Naruto was holding back during that battle. Though the Uchiha wasn't prepared to face someone who might be on the same level as him, Sasuke had been as well. He had seen more of Naruto's abilities in the Chunin exams. In addition to coming out on top in the second exam section with few to no injuries, Naruto's team also defeated a group of Kumo Chunin who had spied on the exams. Subsequently, Naruto emerged victorious in his preliminary match against Kumo Kunoichi by showcasing his mastery of wind chakra and wind ninjutsu. However, it was during his battle with Gaara that Sasuke came to understand the reality. Naruto might not only match Sasuke's strength, but surpass it. Because Gaara had been trained by his sensei specifically to defeat the Tsunade Genin, and Naruto had defeated him when he had failed. Even though he knew he shouldn't be upset about a fellow Konoha shinobi being more powerful, a small part of him couldn't resist being envious. Sasuke trained extremely hard and gave everything he had in order to become stronger so that one day he could defeat his brother and hold him accountable. And yet, despite all of his efforts, he was seeing someone else who appeared to be developing stronger than him more quickly. With a grimace, Sasuke reached up to touch his shoulder, just below his neck, feeling the curse seal burning a little there. He recalled Jiraiya's admonition regarding it, which stated that Sasuke's ability to withstand the seal determined how strong the seal was. However, he also recalled the power it bestowed upon him upon his initial awakening in the forest. Much more power than he appeared to possess at the moment. Shaking his head, he returned to training, trying to ignore those thoughts. He had heard from his mother about Orochimaru of the Sannin, the man who had given him this seal. He was aware that the man was cunning and only cared about making money for himself. Anything that said man gave Sasuke would not be beneficial for him to use. However, as he practiced, a tiny part of him couldn't help but wonder if the power might be worth it in the end. Ground of Training 5. With a soft sigh of regret, Hinata watched as the Naruto clone scattered in front of her. She would miss him. He had just informed her that he would be on a mission out of town. Especially because she had hoped to at least get to know him for a little while in order to gather the courage to perhaps ask him out on a date. She shook her head and shifted her attention toward the village, where she waited in silence under the cover of a tree. When the shadow clone discovered her, she had arranged to meet up with a few people and was waiting for them. Her disappointment at Naruto's mission related absence subsided as she considered the people she would be seeing, and she comforted herself with the knowledge that he would return and they would have more time to spend together. Her expression brightened when she noticed two figures coming out of the surrounding trees. She started to get up, but then she blinked when she noticed a third figure following them in a more covert location. She frowned a little as she emerged from the tree's shade and saw Hitomi and Hanabi being escorted by her previous guardian. Hanabi threw herself forward and gave Hinata a hug before she could say anything more. Nay. Chan. Arming Hanabi in her arms, Hinata grinned. She softly said, "Hello there, Imouto," as she raised her gaze to Hitomi. She glanced at the Hyuga who was maintaining a polite distance and said, "Ka-san, it's good to see you too. But what is Ko-san doing here?" With a gentle smile, Hitomi moved forward and gave Hinata a hug as well. "The clan elders and Hiyashi Sama insist on the two of us having an escort whenever we are not in the compound, for our protection. I chose Ko-san because he is discreet, and bears you no ill will," she continued. Ko nodded his head courteously. With no trace of bitterness or sarcasm in his voice, he said, "Hinata-san, it is good to see you alive and well. Your fight against Neji-san was most impressive." Simply nodding, Hinata turned back to face her mother and sister. She remarked, "I'm so glad you both could come," as the three of them took a seat beneath the tree, Ko keeping watch. "I was worried about what might have happened with the clan after they learned I was the one who rescued you," Hitomi said quietly. "Most of the main family members reacted as you might expect. They were already angry with you for defeating Neji and humiliating the clan in front of all those potential clients and witnesses. Your rescue of us, while not publicized to the rest of the village, still added to the humiliation. But they have done nothing to us, beyond adding protective measures." Gazing down at Hanabi, Hinata nodded. "And how about you, Imouto? How are you doing?" she inquired of her sister, who appeared content to sit in close proximity to Hitomi and Hinata. Hanabi looked a little uncomfortable and shifted. She said, "Well, I've been alright," as she played with the grass and peered down. Hitomi put a gentle arm around Hanabi, who continued to look down while he sighed. She cried as she whispered, I've been having nightmares. That why you didn't get to us in time." She sobbed as the stress and fear overcame her once more. Me and Ka-san are captured and taken away and sometimes a s. Sometimes you're captured too or you're dead and she said. Suddenly, she felt another set of arms envelop her, Hinata holding her close and whispering softly while Hanabi sobbed and hugged Hinata tightly. As Hitomi spoke on Hanabi's behalf, she gave her a gentle head rub in an attempt to soothe her. With shame in her eyes, she muttered, "It's been hard for her and me too. I've also had a few nightmares. I wouldn't have been able to save her if you didn't come along. I would have failed you both." Glancing up at her mother's expression of regret and shame, Hinata put one hand over hers and gave it a gentle squeeze. She whispered, "You did the best you could under the circumstances. And I've never blamed you for what happened to me. Whether you had stood and screamed and fought or not, the clan was going to banish me no matter what. All that would have happened was you getting punished, and Hanabi never being placed in your care again," she continued. Hitomi gave a quiet nod, but her face and eyes were still filled with shame. She whispered, "Still, I should have been stronger." After glancing at her, Hinata turned to face Hanabi, who was still sniffling while curled up against her, and then grinned. She looked at them and said, "Hey, do you two want to know what the secret to getting stronger is?" With a slight hiccup, Hanabi questioned, There's a secret?" Hinata retreated so Hanabi wouldn't have to turn to face her, saying, "It's one I've learned thanks to my friends and team. And that secret is really simple. Do you want to know what it is?" Hitomi grinned a little but admittedly was curious as well. Hanabi said, "Yes, I want to be as strong as you Chan, appearing a little more excited. Hinata made them both blink as she said, "The secret to getting stronger is finding something worth fighting for." "Something worth fighting for?" Hanabi questioned, her eyes watering. She appeared perplexed. Reaching up, Hinata wiped the last of the tears from Hanabi's cheeks and nodded. "Yes, exactly. Through studying, practicing, and engaging in combat with Anko, Sensei and Naruto-kun, I've discovered that it's critical to have a compelling motivation for strengthening oneself. For me, that motivation was to become stronger in order to defend myself and the people I love," she remarked, her thoughts straying to the day at the academy when Naruto lay on the ground, screaming, after being struck by Neji. She smiled as she turned to face the two of them and said, "I wanted to be stronger so that I could protect my friends and my family." With wide eyes, Hanabi gazed up at her, clearly displaying astonishment. She asked Hinata, "And that helped you grow strong enough to beat Neji?" With a smile, Hinata responded, "That is one of the things, yes." Hinata stated, "I always wanted to prove that the faith my teammates and friends had in me was well placed. They believed in me, and I didn't want to let them down. Plus, Neji underestimated me, not realizing that the situation had still been extremely tight." In thought, Hanabi bit her lip. Confused, she said, But what could I fight for?" What could I fight for to grow stronger? With a smile, Hinata nudged her sister's nose. She touched Hanabi gently on the forehead and then her chest, roughly where her heart would be, saying, "That is something you have to find on your own. It has to be something that you'd be willing to fight for, with everything you've got. I can't tell you what that something is. It's something only you can find, in here and in here." After glancing down at her sister's hand, Hanabi gave a slight nod. "I think I understand," she stated, raising an eyebrow at Hinata. "I'll find something worth fighting for, so I can be as strong as you are." Hinata grinned in response. "Don't do it just to prove yourself to me, Imouto. You're already strong in my eyes. Do it for yourself, and for anyone else you care about." Hanabi gave her a firm hug after nodding. With pride in her eyes, Hitomi gazed at Hinata as she gave her a return hug. Regretfully, Ko interrupted their moment as he quietly walked over. "Forgive me, Hitomi Sama, but we need to be going soon," he replied. At that, Hitomi sighed softly. She said, "Thank you, Ko-san," getting to her feet slowly and removing her clothes. "I am sorry, girls, but we must go now. We could only be outside the compound for so long." Though disappointed, Hanabi gave Hinata another hug. "I'm sorry I ever doubted you, Chan. Thank you for everything," she whispered, her eyes welling up with tears once more. Hinata hugged Hanabi and said, "Don't apologize, I'm just happy to have my Imouto back." After giving her a farewell hug, the young girl moved aside to let Hinata hug Hitomi. Hitomi softly said, "Keep shining, my little sunshine," to Hinata, who grinned in response. "I will. And Ka-san. What I said to Hanabi, take it to heart, because you can grow strong too," Hinata replied. Hitomi began a little, then gave a quiet nod. "I will, Hinata. I will," she remarked as she withdrew. As the two of them began to walk away, Hinata noticed and blinked when Ko turned to face her. "If you ever need to give them a message, Hinata-san, please let me know. I will see to it that it reaches them and them alone." Hinata turned to face her former caregiver and bowed. "Thank you, Ko-san, for everything. It is good to know there is one Hyuga I can trust outside of my Ka-san and Imouto." He bowed his head in return and said, "You honor me with your trust, Hinata-san," before heading off to follow Hitomi and Hanabi. After watching them leave, Hinata leaned against the tree and let out a long, tremulous breath, feeling overwhelmed by both joy and sadness. Being able to spend time, even if it was brief, with them during a time when there wasn't an invasion had been such a blessing. She was overjoyed to have been able to assist them. However, she felt bereft because she knew that their time together would be short because they would have to meet her covertly. If Hiyashi knew what they were doing, he would probably punish them or prevent them from seeing Hinata. Hinata couldn't help but feel the man's rage burning inside of her. She was finally able to move past the trauma of being marked with the outcast seal and being banished by her clan all those years ago, thanks to her victory over Neji in the finals. When she had defeated Neji in that arena, any doubts about her strength that perhaps they had been right about Hera had disappeared. She still harbored resentment and even a hint of hatred for the man she had once called her father as well as the other members of the main family, despite the fact that her doubts and fears had subsided. With her fist clenched, she inhaled deeply, attempting to soothe herself. She hoped that eventually this anger would subside, that she would be able to look at Hiyashi without wanting to scream, yell, or hurt him. She would deal with the feelings as they arose, but for now, she inhaled deeply one last time and then pushed herself off the tree and toward her house. 2 hours later, Konoha Gate Naruto stood by the gate, fiddling with his freshly fixed assassin robes to make sure everything still fit, then adjusting the straps of his equipment to make sure everything was tight but not constricting. He smiled as he took out the scarf Hinata had given him and wrapped it around his neck, happy that everything seemed to fit. It was very comfortable, and he treasured it as the kind present that it was to him, something he had not received many of in his life. Additionally, it was very helpful in concealing his identity when he had his hood up by covering the lower portion of his face. Naruto was aware that it would seem absurd to attempt to conceal his identity when all it would take for someone to identify him would be to connect his outfit with himself, but since most of the people he had to kill to carry out his assassination missions had either never seen him or had died before they could identify him, he wasn't too concerned about his outfit giving him away. Most people might not notice anything about his outfit other than the fact that it is dark in color when it is dark outside or during the brief flurry and chaos of one of his strikes. His distinctive whisker marks, however, made him difficult to identify, so it was beneficial to hide them. He just had it around his neck right now, hood down. Other than protecting himself from the sun, there was no reason to cover up, but for now, it wasn't too bad. Though he was getting a little impatient, he looked around. Jiraiya was supposed to meet him here by now, but Naruto wanted to start as soon as possible because the older Sannin was running behind schedule. He heard a commotion off in the distance and blinked, turning that way. A cloud of dust was gathering in that direction, and Naruto's eyes narrowed before widening when he realized what was causing it. Jiraiya was running toward him at full speed, a terrified expression on his face as he was being chased by several civilian women in kunoichi, all of whom were dressed in robes, bath towels, or hastily put on ordinary clothes. They were all flinging different objects at the toad sage, including kunai, shuriken, and, strangely enough, pots and pans from one Yoshino Nara. With a groaned face, Naruto turned to face the two gate guards. He turned and leapt into the trees, saying, "I think you'll need to sign us out on your own guys." Jiraiya followed him out the gate as the group of irate women stopped at the edge and threw objects and cursed at the man as he retreated, with one skillet managing a lucky smack into the back of Jiraiya's head. One figure on a nearby rooftop watched the two now distant shinobi with a neutral expression as the group of enraged women dispersed. Silently, Kakashi stood there, watching Naruto and Jiraiya go, his regular book tucked away in his supply pouch. Turning, he hopped down to the street level, his demeanor slightly somber as he moved away from the gate. Jiraiya, a renowned Sannin, had arrived before him and was beginning to train Naruto, so it appeared that all of his plotting and preparation had been in vain. He'd heard the news about Naruto and Sasuke's battle outside of Konoha with the Suna siblings, and he was impressed by Sasuke's performance but also a little scared by the fact that Sasuke's strategies ultimately proved ineffective as Gaara defeated them all. However, Kakashi was informed that someone else had beaten Kakashi to the punch in terms of teaching Naruto ninjutsu after learning that Naruto had not only learned and used the Rasengan to do even more damage than Sasuke's Chidori but had also summoned the power of the Kyuubi to defeat Shukaku. There was a part of Kakashi that was upset about that because he thought he was the best at teaching Naruto ninjutsu, which was where the boy's true talent lay. Naruto possessed enormous reserves of chakra, which, with the right training, he could use to unleash a variety of extremely potent ninjutsu on his adversaries. Furthermore, Kakashi could have taught Naruto dozens of ninjutsu to give him that lethal arsenal, since he had amassed a formidable collection of ninjutsu over the years thanks to his Sharingan. Now, Naruto was being taught by someone else, much like with the Genin team assignments. This time, however, Kakashi found it more difficult to defend his superiority as a teacher. Indeed, he was certain that he was more knowledgeable about ninjutsu than Jiraiya, but Jiraiya was a much more seasoned shinobi and teacher than Kakashi was. Kakashi sighed in disappointment. One of the reasons he had wanted Naruto on his team was that he was Minato's son. After the boy's parents passed away, he had made an effort to support him, but as one of the rising Junin in the village, he was frequently called upon to assist in keeping the village strong. Anko and Raphael had already begun mentoring him by the time he was able to retire from Anbu and devote the time he desired to Naruto. Kakashi had made the decision to wait until Naruto received his academy diploma before beginning to mentor him, only to have that opportunity lost when Sarutobi trained Naruto under Anko's tutelage and Anko developed into a full Junin. The thought made Kakashi clench one fist. He was aware that he could have taught Naruto more effectively than Anko could have. Instead of continuing to waste all of Naruto's potential, he would have really brought it out. To atone for his previous transgressions and pay tribute to his sensei, he would have taught Naruto everything he knew and worked to transform Team 7 into an even better organization than it had been during his tenure. He shook his head slightly and slowly released his hand, but now it seemed too late for that. Heading towards the market district, he reached back into his pouch and took out his book, opening it but not really reading it. For additional training, he needed to meet with Sasuke. Sasuke would at least be able to atone for one of his previous transgressions through training. As soon as he got to the meeting location, which was in front of a tiny cafe copyright, his instincts kicked in. Something wasn't right. There was a faint but persistent aura of intent to kill. It was there, but it didn't seem to be directed at anyone. He looked like he was turning a page in his book, but instead he took the opportunity to look around. He saw two people sitting in the cafe copyright. They were both wearing black cloaks with red trim and clouds on them, along with wide-brimmed straw hats. Although the intensity of the larger one appeared to be so low that anyone below Junin rank would probably be unable to detect it, it appeared to be continuously emitting the killer intent. Asuma and Kurenai, who were also in the district, approached him, revealing this fact. He smiled at them with his trademarked eyes. Seeing how closely the two had been strolling together, he said, "Well, look at you two, here on a date." Asuma appeared somewhat sheepish, and Kurenai blushed just a little bit. Glancing aside, she said, "He's just helping me pick up a few things for Yakumo-san." A typical person would have thought she was being ashamed. Her red eyes, however, had followed the two figures' general direction, indicating to him that they, too, had sensed the same thing. "How about you, Kakashi? Didn't think you were a sweets person?" Asuma inquired, gesturing to the nearby cafe copyright and other tiny dining establishments. Kakashi just shrugged and kept his eye smile intact. "I'm simply waiting for my pupilla and see. He's here at last," Kakashi remarked as Sasuke drew near. The smaller figure leaned over to his partner and spoke as he saw the tiniest flinch out of the corner of his eye. Glancing at Kakashi, Sasuke crossed his arms. "You're on time for once, sensei? The world must be about to end," he said, glancing around. "I'm not really a big fan of pastries, Kakashi. Sensei, what are we doing here?" Kakashi remarked, "Oh, just taking in the sights. It's always good to appreciate the village and its people. Helps build up your desire to protect it, especially after that invasion," pointing out that the two figures had already departed in the brief moment they had been preoccupied with Sasuke's arrival. He cast a quick glance at Asuma and Kurenai, who both nodded before shuffling off, leaving Sasuke perplexed. "Is something going on, Kakashi? Sensei?" he inquired. With his free hand on Sasuke's head, Kakashi simply smiled at him. He led Sasuke away and said, "Nothing for you to worry about. Now let's discuss some more training regimens." Neither observed the third figure emerging from the rooftops and making a left turn. After making a swift yet stealthy retreat, the two cloaked figures were now strolling beside the abandoned river that ran through Konoha when two more figures materialized in front of them. Asuma and Kurenai watched the two figures, both in defensive stances. Asuma turned to face the taller figure and remarked, "After an invasion, we don't really appreciate armed strangers in our village. Especially ones leaking as much killer intent as you are. You know the roads are dangerous, right? Bandits and missing nin preying on travelers. It pays to be well armed, and scary enough to make them think twice about attacking," the man who was larger said. Kurenai, preparing to use genjutsu in an instant, watched the two of them and demanded, "Who are you, and what is your business in Konoha?" The taller figure turned to face his partner, his head covered by a hat. "They seem to be mighty demanding of us, don't you think, partner? Is seeing your old comrades making you teary-eyed and nostalgic?" he was asking facetiously. The smaller figure lowered their head for a brief moment before raising their hand and carefully taking off and discarding their hat. Asuma and Kurenai became rigid upon seeing the face of Itachi Uchiha, the missing nin of Konoha who killed several of the more powerful shinobi and members of the Uchiha clan's leadership. Itachi's Sharingan eyes took in both of them, his expression emotionless and cold. He said in a monotone, taking off his coat collar to fully reveal his face. "You speak too much, Kisame-san," he said. To Kurenai and Asuma, Kisame said, "Well, someone has to be the chatty one in our partnership," tossing aside his own hat. Now that they knew the situation was much worse than they had anticipated, the Konoha Junin were both tense. Itachi was a well-known S-ranked missing nin, in the same league of notoriety as Orochimaru or Hanzo the Salamander of AIM, because of his extraordinary skill and rank as a Konoha shinobi, as well as his actions in killing his own father and several other Uchiha shinobi. And Kisame Hoshigaki of Kiri, another well-known S-ranked missing nin, was his fellow countryman. Kisame, one of the renowned 7 swordsmen of Kiri, had left the village after it was learned he was planning to overthrow the government and had killed multiple influential politicians without permission, including the daimyo of another nation. Because of his strength and skill as a Kiri swordsman and his ability to steal the sword Samahada, he was also granted an S rank with ease. Asuma, trying to sound more confident than he actually was, said, "Itachi Uchiha, come back here to finish what you started." Itachi finally spoke after glancing between the two Konoha Junin. He inquired, "Where is Naruto Uzumaki?" At that, Kurenai's eyes narrowed. "Why do you want to know?" The bulk of them were taken aback by the sudden appearance of the blade, and the figure holding it as a third voice said, "A good question," as a blade materialized at Itachi's throat. But all Itachi could do was widen his eyes a little and turn his head just enough to cast a sidelong glance. Still speaking in a monotone, he said, "Kaseki-san, it has been some time." Kaseki met his expressionless gaze with an equally stoic one. "Likewise, Itachi-san. You've gotten rusty, allowing me to sneak upon you like that." "Perhaps you've improved your stealth skills," Itachi complimented her, "though you should have killed me instead of letting me know you were there." Without giving Kaseki a chance to reply, Kisame, moving faster than one would anticipate for a man of his size, grabbed the sword's hilt and swung it down at Kaseki, who leapt backwards. As Kurenai faded into the distance, Itachi swiftly parried a blow from one of Asuma's hidden trench knives, his Sharingan blazing to life. She emerged from the tree to strike at him, and he felt the genjutsu take hold, trapping him against it. Asuma suddenly found no resistance to his blade, which caused him to stagger forward towards the trapped Kurenai, trapping her in the tree. She dispelled the genjutsu and he just managed to stop his blade from stabbing her, but Itachi's sudden blast of water blew them both back and sent them flying into the river. Gradually, Itachi emerged onto the river and observed the pair. He said, "Kisame-san, kill them all." With one hand holding his sword wrapped in bandages, Kisame smiled at Kaseki. He said, "Hey, with pleasure," as Kaseki assumed a defensive stance and gripped both swords. "Fish boy, don't think this will be easy," Kaseki remarked as she studied her opponent. Kaseki shot back, "Good. Give me a challenge," and the two charged at each other, dancing to death as Kaseki's blades flashed in the sun. With a narrow escape, Kaseki backflipped through the air, dodging a deadly blow from missing Nin Kisame Hoshigaki's enormous bandaged blade. With enough force to shatter the sidewalk, the sword struck her position and left behind a small crater and a network of cracks in the cement. Kaseki deftly landed and pushed herself forward in an attempt to surprise her opponent, but Kisame effortlessly withdrew the enormous blade and spun, bringing the sword around in a crushing side swing that would have broken her ribs if it had struck. The Uchiha assassin barely had time to duck before Kisame's blade reached him, so he quickly retreated. She studied him carefully. At least for the moment she was safe from her opponent once more. She was aware that the best way to counter someone with a longer weapon was to close the distance so they couldn't use their weapon's advantage. It was just a matter of getting close enough, and it seemed that Kisame had trained himself not to do that. He could wield his massively heavy, long, and bladed weapon with ease in one or both hands, even though it could cut through the air with deadly speed. Combined with his own considerable height and reach, he was able to rapidly recover and strike opponents at long range before they could approach him. With caution, she examined the blade covered in bandages, understanding that every one of the 7 swords of Kiri possessed unique powers that elevated them beyond mere weaponry. Even though the majority of the weapons users turned into renegade ninjas, Kirigakure tried their best to keep the weapon's powers a secret, so much so that their powers were unknown. She was therefore unaware of the current capabilities of this weapon. She swiftly stabbed both blades into the ground and then swiftly flipped through hand signs, deciding to try a different tactic. She quickly raised her swords, dove behind the fireball, and used it as a distraction by drawing in air to launch a massive fireball straight at Kisame. But when she saw Kisame raise his blade directly in front of the fireball, it stopped her in her tracks. Her jutsu struck, but it dissipated into nothing in an instant, leaving the blade mostly unscathed except for some bandages that were singed. Under the bandages, Kisame's blade appeared to wiggle and squirm, almost like it was alive. Kisame grinned. He said, "I have to thank you. Samahata hasn't had a treat in a while," and hefted the blade, resting it on one shoulder. Kaseki narrowed her eyes, trying to take in what had happened, and then she spoke. She questioned, "Your blade, it absorbs chakra?" Kisame kept grinning at her. After saying, "Got it in one. My blade here loves to gobble up chakra, so please, feel free to launch more ninjutsu at me. She's quite hungry." He lunged in her direction and struck her quickly, barely avoiding the blow. Neither Asuma nor Kurenai's battle was progressing any better. Itachi was now fighting the 2 shadow clones that had seemingly materialized out of nowhere after they had knocked the 2 of them into the waterway. Using his wind chakra, enhanced taijutsu and trench knives to extend their reach and give them a more lethal cutting edge, Asuma was fighting him in close quarters. Itachi's Sharingan eyes made it easy for him to see the wind chakra being used, which allowed him to anticipate and avoid Asuma's attacks. Normally, the wind chakra was invisible, making it nearly impossible for enemies to avoid his attacks. He reached up to grab Kurenai's downward stab, but even now he leaned back far enough that the trailing edge of wind chakra missed him, giving Asuma a sidekick. He turned her arm, making her scream in agony as the kunai fell from her grasp into Itachi's other hand. This gave him the opportunity to block another strike from Asuma before hurling Kurenai in the direction of the Sarutobi, who was smoking a cigarette. Asuma skidded back, barely managing to catch Kurenai before hurling a cloud of flaming ash from his mouth in Itachi's direction. Asuma thought he had hit the former Konoha Anbu when the cloud engulfed him, but as it quickly dissipated, a cyclone of water blew away the ash, revealing Itachi to be completely unharmed. The former Uchiha gave Asuma a stern look before raising his hand and hurling multiple shuriken in Kurenai's direction. After blocking the shuriken, both Junin let out a pained cry as they saw cuts on their arms, cheeks, and legs. The Itachi in front of them vanished almost instantly, and a second one appeared between them, crouching and holding 2 kunai, each blade dripping with blood. Kurenai's legs buckled just a little bit, and she almost fell. Muttering, "Gee. Genjutsu," she finally understood. At some point, Itachi had managed to get them into a genjutsu where they had to fight a dummy Itachi while the real one moved. Itachi offered them no response. Instead, he just spun around and raised his blades, preparing to stab them both in the neck. Suddenly, a water dragon struck him, causing him to scatter into smoke and reveal a sodden log being thrown into the waterway's wall. Glancing up, Asuma and Kurenai saw Kakashi standing there with a book in his hand. He casually said, "Sorry, had to take the long route here after getting rid of Sasuke," as his one visible eye watched Kaseki and Kisame battle. The female Uchiha winced as she was pushed back once more by Kisame's blade, knowing that she would have to do something drastic if she was going to have a chance of actually hitting Kisame. She dodged another blow and charged forward, her blades ready. She saw him react precisely as she had planned, swerving to give her a swift thrust in the direction of the slash she had just avoided. She ducked to the side, the blade slicing her arm instead of her chest, making her wince in pain as whatever was beneath the bandages tore through both her flesh and the bandages. Ignoring it, she persisted, slashing low at Kisame as she went by. Her eyes widened as she realized there was not nearly as much resistance as a human body should have provided as her blade passed right through him. She was rewarded by the feel of it cutting into him. Turning around in time, she saw Kisame disappear into a puddle of water and the real one emerge with Itachi on the waterway, both of them appearing unharmed from the beginning of the fight. Kaseki quickly followed Kakashi and the others, frowning as she noticed a jagged cut on her arm. Glancing over at Kisame, she noticed that the bandages had come off, exposing a bluish gray blade with almost serrated edges beneath the scales. She bit her lip, realizing that if he had struck her with more than just the sword's edge, the potential damage to her would have been far worse. Kisame turned to face his comrade and laughed softly. "Your former clansman there is quite a fighter. I actually wasn't bored for once," said the man. "Can I keep fighting her?" Itachi squinted as he took everything in. "We don't have time for this, Kisame. This was meant to be an infiltration, not an assault," he whispered quietly. At last, Kakashi closed his book and began to study them. He lifted his forehead protector to reveal his Sharingan eye and said, "So it seems our uninvited guests were a lot more dangerous. I almost wish I had rounded up an Enbu squadron before coming." "What are you doing here, Itachi-san?" he inquired. "Feeling nostalgic and wanting to visit your old stomping grounds?" Itachi just looked at him, arching an eyebrow a little. "Considering I doubt any of you will be leaving alive, I shall inform you. We're here for the Yondaime's legacy," he said with simplicity. That caused the other three as well as Kakashi's eyes to widen. Kakashi talked to the others quietly. "I hope you three are still in fighting shape. Kaseki, you'll help me take on Itachi. Asuma, Kurenai, got for Kisame," he said. The three gave a nod, getting ready while Kisame quickly went over hand signals. With delight, he exclaimed, "I guess it's not much of an infiltration anymore. Sweden. Suiria, Dan no Jutsu, water release. Water dragon bullet jutsu." A second water dragon suddenly smashed into the first one, sending both of them scattering as the first one rose up from beneath him and shot towards the four Junin with the intention of blowing them all away. When Kakashi looked at the two intruders after releasing his own hand sign, he noticed that Itachi's Sharingan had changed form, which caused his eyes to enlarge. Kaseki's eyes grew wide, then she turned to face Kurenai and Asuma. She closed her own eyes and yelled, "You two close your eyes and don't look, no matter what." Kakashi saw Itachi's pinwheel shaped irises and quickly reacted, too. He closed his normal eye, believing his Sharingan would shield him from what was approaching. The two Junin also reacted quickly. Itachi whispered, "Tsukuyomi," as Kakashi abruptly noticed that everything around him was changing color. He was abruptly chained to a cross as the ground was pitch black and the sky was a blood-red color. He attempted to release a chakra burst in the hopes of getting away, but nothing happened. He bit his lip to draw blood and hurt himself in an attempt to break free of the genjutsu once more, but Itachi appeared in front of him and he realized he was still stuck. In the real world, no more than a second had gone by when the three Konoha Junin, their eyes closed, heard the sound of Kakashi's hands and knees hitting the water along with his agonized gasp. Itachi just arched an eyebrow, examining Kakashi's collapsed form. "You are quite resilient to still be conscious after that," he stated. Asuma tightened his grip on his weapons, fearing what he was blind to. He yelled, "Kaseki, what the hell is going on?" Kaseki opened her eyes slowly and grimaced as she avoided meeting Itachi's gaze. Tsukuyomi is a powerful genjutsu that only those who have evolved their Sharingan can utilize. And even then not all of them get it as a technique. Only someone with an equally powerful Sharingan has a hope of resisting being pulled into it. Itachi put me under it right before he left the village. Itachi turned his back on Kaseki and concentrated on Kakashi. Finally, he stated, our prey is not in the village. We need to end this quickly and leave before more shinobi arrive. As Kisame moved forward to raise his weapon, he said, hey, allow me, but just then, a green blur appeared and slammed into his chest. After delivering a forceful kick to Kisame's chest, Guy backflipped off of Kisame, landing next to the other Junin and hauling Kakashi up. This sent the enormous blue missing nin skidding backwards. 12 more shinobi appeared at the same moment, half of them Anbu and the other half Uchiha, their Sharingan blazing. Don't worry, my friend's help is on its way, exclaimed Guy, grinning broadly at everyone save the three who had their eyes downcast or closed. You can open your eyes, but keep your gaze down. You can defeat the Sharingan simply by not looking your opponent in the face. Itachi scowled when he noticed the extra help, as well as the hate in his former clan members' eyes. Silently, he remarked, it seems that we took too long. Kisame-san, we are leaving. With a grimace, Kisame slung his sword onto his back and used his other hand to rub his chest. Muttering, damn it, I didn't get to kill anything. The 6 Uchiha immediately prepared to use a variety of fire jutsu to attack Itachi and Kisame when 3 identical hand sign wielding clones of Itachi appeared. You will not leave here, traitor, exclaimed one of the Uchiha. The 2 rogue nins and the Konoha shinobi darted backwards, fearing that the water would rise in a massive wall and collapse on them. They were left alone and there was no sign of the 2 rogue nin when it abruptly collapsed. One of the Anbu exclaimed, search the area and lock the village down, as his companions and the Uchiha took off in different directions in an attempt to find their target. Meanwhile, Guy was scowling at the now comatose Kakashi, who was hanging lifelessly off his shoulder. We need to get you 3 to the hospital, he stated. My eternal rival is in desperate need of care, and I'm sure you 3 could use a checkup as well. Asuma and Kurenai nodded, but Kaseki was preoccupiedly staring at the spot where Itachi had been standing. She didn't appear to be aware of them until Kurenai gave her a light shoulder shake, which made her turn to face her. The ruby-eyed Genjutsu mistress said, you need to get that looked at, and Kaseki nodded absent-mindedly while examining her arm before trailing the others to the hospital. Totally oblivious to the shadow lurking in the trees, they turned and made their way toward the Hokage tower. While traveling with a sigh, Naruto glanced behind Jiraiya, who was now walking a little more quickly than before after recovering from the crazy race from Konoha. The 2 of them were setting out in earnest now that he was breathing again. So who are we looking for again? You didn't really tell me much except we're looking for someone you know. He answered, and Jiraiya looked back at him. Tsunade Senju, the final member of the Sannin. She was my teammate along with Orochimaru. She's probably the best medical nin in the world and a pretty dangerous fighter in taijutsu. We're going to retrieve her to aid with the wounded from the invasion. And well, she is going to be the next Hokage as well, he continued. Naruto's eyes grew slightly wide. To his surprise, he inquired, Hokage Sama is retiring. It was a little shocking to him that a new Hokage would replace the old one who had been one for all of his life. This last fight drained him too much, kid. You need to remember that he was Hokage for a lot of years before your old man took up the job, and then he took it up again after the Kyuubi attack. He needs someone fresh to take up the position, this time for good. And of all the candidates at the moment, Tsunade-chan is the best choice, Jiraiya told him. At that, Naruto gave a quiet nod. Okay, so we're going to find her and bring her back. Buddha, why wasn't she in the village already? Unless it's like a Sannin thing, to leave the village and stuff? He inquired. Jiraiya laughed a weary laugh. Not exactly, kid, though that does seem to be the case, doesn't it? Orochimaru Teme betrayed the village because he felt he wasn't being given what he deserved, while I'm mostly out there maintaining my spy network and intercepting problems before they become threats to the village. Tsunade-chan, she left the village for personal reasons, he continued quietly. With a frown, Naruto wanted to find out what those personal reasons were, but he stopped himself, thinking that if Jiraiya had meant to tell Naruto, he would have said what they were. The blonde shook his head and, as he and Jiraiya drove on, silence fell for a while. But after a few minutes, the Sannin became alert once more. He grinned and said, so you finally managed to pull off a Rasengan, huh? At that, Naruto gave a nod. Yeah, I still don't have it down perfect yet, but I was able to pull it off using a clone to help shape it. I focus on providing the power and maintaining it, while the clone shapes the chakra into the swirling sphere. Once it's created, I'm able to maintain it. As soon as my arm has healed up though, I'll work on being able to pull it off by myself. Jiraiya did not stop smiling. Not a bad shortcut, kid. The shadow clone could prove useful in battle, acting as a distraction while you deliver the jutsu. But it's good you're not planning to rely on the clone. It's better to master the jutsu entirely. At that, Naruto nodded to him. So what else were you planning on teaching me? I've already got summoning and the Rasengan down, for the most part. Jiraiya took a book out of his pocket and handed it to Naruto. For now, kid, we'll focus on Fuinjutsu. That's something you can work on without stressing your arm, Jiraiya said. Here, I want you to start reading this when you get a chance. It'll prepare you for more intermediate sealing. After opening the book and quickly skimming it, Naruto nodded. He smiled and said, "Thanks, Arrow." Sennin, observing Jiraiya flinch and moan at the moniker. He tucked it into one of his supply pouches, planning to examine it during their next break. Jiraiya soon recovered and came to join him. I also got some wind jutsu for you to start practicing with as well. Not a whole lot, but I'm hoping maybe negotiations with Suna might get us a few more wind jutsu to pass on to you, he said, turning to Naruto. It should help beef up your ninjutsu arsenal. While nodding, Naruto appeared a little hesitant. He still possessed the mindset of an assassin, preferring surprise and stealth qualities that most ninjutsu just lacked. However, he was also aware that he needed to increase his offensive power. He needed to even things out more after his altercation with Gaara. "Thanks, that'll definitely help," he replied. Jiraiya simply smiled at him before taking a more confident step outside. He said in a cheerful voice, "Come on. The sooner we get to the nearest town, the sooner we can start searching for Tsunade," as Naruto hurried to catch up with Jiraiya's slower gait. Konoha with a worried expression. Sasuke hurried to the hospital with the intention of locating Kaseki. After completing a mission to assist in clearing some debris from a collapsed building, he and his allies overheard two shinobi discussing how Kaseki, Kakashi, Asuma, and Kurenai had been hospitalized following an altercation with some intruders. He wanted to make sure the woman, who he thought of as a big sister, was okay because he was worried that she had suffered serious injuries. As soon as he entered the hospital, he hurried to the information desk to talk with the nurse who was stationed there. "I'm looking for Kaseki Uchiha's room. Is she alright?" he inquired. His abrupt arrival caused the nurse to blink in surprise, and she then turned to look at her logbook. She was treated for minor injuries, and is most likely simply waiting to be released. "You can go see her in room 17, second floor," she told him. With a nod of gratitude, Sasuke left with a sense of relief. That was before his older brother betrayed the clan, and he had always liked Kaseki because she used to hang out with him when Itachi was busy. He didn't want to lose her because she had grown to be like a sibling to him. As he quickly made his way to the second floor and began walking down the hallway, he heard voices coming from a partially opened door. The voice he recognized as Asuma Sarutobi, Team 10's sensei, said, "Itachi escaped." He and Kisame both managed to escape Konoha before any of the Anbu teams could catch up to them. Used a genjutsu on a gate guard apparently that allowed them to get both in and out of the village. The Anbu teams had to abandon the chase after about a kilometer away from the village. What with us needing all the manpower we can just to keep the village safe. Before Kaseki could say anything, Sasuke tensed up at the sound of his brother's name. "I'm not really surprised. Itachi was one of the best Anbu before he left. He's only gotten better since then," she replied quietly. "The real problem is why he was here in the first place. You heard why he and Kisame were here. They're after the Yondaime's legacy." Kurenai questioned, "So you really believe they're after Naruto?" Sasuke's eyes widened at that. "I'm betting they want what's inside of him. Enko told me that Jiraiya Sama mentioned a group was hunting down people like Naruto and Yugito, and I'm guessing Itachi is part of that group. The worst part is with Naruto outside of the village, he's that much easier to nab. I'm betting Itachi managed to pry that out of Kakashi's head," Kaseki stated before Sasuke noticed movement in the space. "Someone needs to go to Jiraiya, Sama and Naruto, to warn them." Sasuke overheard Guy say, "Hokage. Sama will need to authorize such an action first. We don't have the manpower to send anyone just running off after them. Still, they do need to be warned. Jiraiya Sama would most likely be able to deal with both of those miscreants." After hearing all of this, Sasuke narrowed his eyes and decided quickly. The door was about to open when he turned and ran out. Asuma left the room after saying, "Then we better go do that now, before we lose too much time," and she saw a flash of black vanish around the corner of the stairway. As he scowled and looked that way, he was taken aback to see an Anbu suddenly materialize in front of him in a shunshin. "I'm searching for Kaseki Uchiha," the Anbu said softly while donning a tiger mask. As the Anbu turned to face Kaseki, she stepped out into the hallway looking perplexed. "Hokage." Sama wishes to speak to you immediately. Please come with me. With a slight frown, Kaseki nodded and followed the Anbu out of sight while the others gawked in fascination. Kaseki and the Anbu arrived at the Hokages tower in no time at all, and Sarutobi was sitting there quietly going over all the paperwork related to rebuilding the village. But as soon as Kaseki got there, he moved everything aside. Thank you, Tora. That will be all, he replied. Sarutobi quickly made the Anbu vanish by turning on the office's privacy seals. Then he took out a little scroll and placed it on the desk. I called you here because outside of me and my advisors, as well as Raphael.san, you are the only one who knows the truth about Itachi.san, he stated simply. Shortly after he left Konoha, he infiltrated a group of dangerous rogue shinobi to begin feeding us information on their plans and intentions. Your battle with him allowed him the time necessary to create a shadow clone and send it to me with his latest report. The shadow clone also gave me this scroll addressed to you. At that, Kaseki winced and her gaze shifted to the scroll. She stared at it, not sure if she wanted to take it and read it, and her heart was torn between joy and fear. She closed her eyes and inhaled deeply, trembling, before slowly raising it again. She mumbled, "Thank you, Hokage. Sama." With sad eyes, Sarutobi observed her hesitation and surmised at the likely emotional turmoil she was going through. I am sorry for what you have to suffer. I truly wish I could have prevented the events that necessitated you and Itachi.san being separated. Kaseki glanced down at the scroll and nodded softly, not really paying much attention to him. After a few moments of silence, she spoke up and tucked the scroll into a pouch. She could barely contain her emotions as she spoke, her voice tight. Itachi mentioned the Yondaimi's legacy when we confronted him. I believe that he and Kisame were sent here after Naruto. We need to send someone to warn them that Itachi and Kisame will be pursuing them, she said. Thank you, Sarutobi said, shoving her aside. I will handle that, though I'm sure Itachi will find some way to signal Jiraiya beforehand. There was a quick knock on the door as Kaseki nodded and turned to go. Lifting the privacy seals, Sarutobi's expression fell back to a frown. Enter now, he commanded. A moment later, the door opened and a shinobi darted in. Hokage. Sama, a civilian, saw Genin Sasuke Uchiha leaving the village at high speed. He was heading off to the northwest. Sarutobi's scowl got bigger. Then he looked up at Kaseki. That is the same direction Itachi and Kisame left, as did Naruto and Jiraiya. He must be going after Itachi, he concluded. Go after Sasuke and try to intercept him before he gets too far. I'll see about sending Guy after you as quickly as I can. Go. With a nod, Kaseki vanished in a shunshin, leaving Sarutobi to lament this unexpected development. A few hours later, Naruto took in the sights as he and Jiraiya strolled through the small town. The town was rather small and served primarily as a hub for passing travelers who wanted to rest or sell some of their wares. As the day was coming to an end, it was the ideal spot for Jiraiya and Naruto to stop for the night. In addition to finding comfortable lodging and delicious food here, they could learn a lot from the constant stream of people entering and leaving the town. Jiraiya just grinned while leading the way and making his way straight to the most likely location of an inn in the village. He paused briefly to grin at a couple of attractive women who seemed to like him. He kept grinning until Naruto nudged him, which made him start walking once more as the blonde despondently shook his head. They had no idea that two figures were silently observing them from a hilltop overlooking the town. Whistling softly, Kisame recognized Jiraiya's tall, broad figure. Well, that's definitely not good. Jiraiya of the Sannin. I doubt even combined we could take him on and survive. Though it'd be a hell of a fight, quietly he replied. Itachi just continued to observe, his thoughts processing the circumstances. He needed to figure out how to tell Jiraiya what was happening without giving away his position in Akatsuki. Kisame was a vicious, violent shinobi, but he was also clever. Itachi realized he had to play it cool. His mind started to form a plan as he surveyed the village. With Kisame trailing behind, he muttered, "We will just need to separate the two then," and made his way down towards the town. Jiraiya pointed to the inn and sighed with relief when he soon saw it. There we go. That should do nicely, he said, guiding Naruto towards it. He paused just long enough to notice a slight sensation of chakra shooting through him, tensing up inside while maintaining his composure outside. He was paying the innkeeper for a room for two. After accepting the key, he turned to face Naruto when he saw the strikingly beautiful woman in the rather short blue dress walk by. She turned to Jiraiya and gave her a quick wink before continuing on. The rather silly smile that appeared on Jiraiya's face as the toad sage turned to face him and gave him the key made Naruto sigh. He said, "Why don't you go head on up and rest, Gaki? I'll catch up with you later," and then he enthusiastically followed the woman. Silently murmuring, "Damn old perv," Naruto took the key and made his way upstairs to the room. He hurried in, locking the door behind him, then pulling the dual sword and bow scabbard off his back so he could lie on the bed more comfortably. He called forth a shadow clone in an instant, and it took out its copy of the sealbook that Jiraiya had given them earlier and started reading it. Meanwhile, Naruto slowly withdrew his ninjutsu and examined it for any signs of rust, weakness, or blunting of the cutting edge. Even though he had checked everything before leaving Konoha, he was under a little time pressure and wanted to use their stop to conduct a more thorough inspection of his tools and weapons. A knock on the door interrupted him as he was about to examine his crossbow and sheathe his sword after making sure the hilt wrappings were secure. Since he doubted any of the innkeepers would be bothering him and Jiraiya would have probably just entered through the window, the blonde assassin was immediately on high alert. He nodded to the shadow clone as he slowly stood up, put his gear back on his back, and proceeded to the window, opening it as silently and slowly as possible. The clone approached the door and extended one of its hidden blades because, at the time of its creation, Naruto had not been carrying a crossbow or blade. "Who is it?" A few seconds of silence passed before a man's voice could be heard on the other end. "I have a message for Naruto Uzumaki. I was told he was staying in this inn," the voice continued. The clone stiffened as Naruto shook his head and slipped out the window. "What's the message?" it inquired, to which a groan of frustration was answered and the door was abruptly kicked in. The clone narrowly avoided the collision in time, emerging to face two towering men clad in black cloaks trimmed in red. With an active Sharingan, the lead one narrowed his eyes, and then a shuriken burrowed itself into the clone, scattering it with a barely perceptible flicker. Itachi declared, "He's escaped." Kisame asked in shock, "How could you tell?" as Itachi turned and hurriedly led the way back out of the inn. The window was also open. The target had a sword strapped to his back. The clone there didn't. "Most likely it was created while he had it removed," Itachi remarked, gaining instant insight into all of the details. He glanced up and down the street as they left the inn and then pointed to a small dust trail that someone moving quickly had kicked up from the dirt path. "That way." As soon as he saw the man who had distributed his clone's memories, Naruto cursed. The renegade ninja of Konoha and betrayer of the Uchiha clan is Itachi Uchiha. 1. Before setting out on an assassination, Raphael made the Brotherhood members check the bingo book for missing nins so they could identify any of them right away and determine whether or not to take them on. His clone saw the other figure for a split second, long enough to make out that it was tall and blue but not much more before it vanished. The blonde assassin was running along rooftops, desperately searching for Jiraiya, but as he was searching, the sound of shuriken slicing through the air interrupted him. He struck the dirt road, and spawning multiple shadow clones. Naruto and his clones all drew swords, and Itachi and Kisame also materialized. Kisame grinned and said, "Ooh, he thinks he's a swordsman," but as Itachi stepped forward, his hand stopped at the hilt of his blade. "Naruto Uzumaki, you'll accompany us," Itachi uttered, fixing his eyes on Naruto. Though Kisame was unaware of which was the real one, he was aware that Itachi could quickly discern minute details that allowed him to see through clones or disguises even in the absence of the Sharingan. One of his clones spoke, and Naruto tightened his grip on his ninjutsu. The clone joked, "Sorry, but my schedule is kind of booked at the moment." "Rain check." But Itachi gave him a kunai and scattered it. Just as it was about to charge, a shuriken lodged itself in the head of another clone, scattering it too. Given that they had been at different ends of the group, Naruto was shocked by how quickly both of the dispersals had occurred in the same number of seconds. Itachi's eyes narrowed just enough to stop him from taking a step towards Naruto. He turned to face his little brother and said softly, "You should not be here, Sasuke." Naruto's eyes expanded upon seeing Sasuke Uchiha standing on a nearby roof. Sasuke leapt from the roof and landed in front of Itachi among the Naruto clones. With his two Tomo Sharingan blazing to life, Sasuke said, his voice cracking slightly with anger, "I heard you stopped by in Konoha. And you attacked Kaseki Ne-chan." Naruto, who was standing next to him, scowled at Itachi after hearing the part about Kaseki and stiffened. "To be honest, I was more responsible for that than Itachi," smirking, Kisame said. "She was quite fast with those swords of her. Too bad she wasn't fast enough." Sasuke ignored him, keeping his full attention on Itachi. He whispered to Itachi, "Traitor, I have waited a long time for this. For a chance to face you, to bring you in for the crimes you committed. The betrayal of Konoha, our clan, our own family," he yelled. Itachi observed him objectively, never displaying any feelings. "Do you honestly believe you can defeat me, Sasuke? I would hope you are not that arrogant." While keeping an eye on Itachi, Sasuke pulled out a pair of kunai, Silently, he asked Naruto, "Where is Jiraiya sama?" "I wish I had known sooner," Naruto shot back, keeping a wary eye on Kisame. Without Jiraiya present, he was aware that they had absolutely no chance against these two. Sasuke was also aware of this. He knew he couldn't defeat Itachi on his own, even though he still wanted to. And he didn't think they would even get close to Itachi, even with Naruto's help. Itachi's eyes narrowed slightly upon witnessing his younger brother's refusal to give up. Before he spoke, his lips quirked slightly into a frown behind the collar of his cloak. "Secure the Jinchuriki. I shall handle my brother," he replied. Itachi was in front of Sasuke before he could respond, already digging his fist into Sasuke's stomach. With his mouth hanging open and his eyes widening, Sasuke let go of the air that was being forcefully expelled from his lungs. The Genin Uchiha was about to fall to his knees when Itachi kicked and spun around, sending him flying into a wall. Naruto yelled, "Sasuke!" but was immediately knocked back when Kisame's sword crashed through the ground where he was standing. The enormous swordsman cried out, "Pay attention, Gaki!" and struck out, destroying one of the shadow clones that had launched itself at him with a fist. Before the other clones could react, he destroyed them all with a broad arc of his sword swing, swinging the blade up onto his shoulder and beaming the entire time. At the sight of that, Naruto felt fear take hold of him. Kisame had moved his blade at an unbelievable speed, particularly considering how long and heavy the weapon was. He was aware that he would probably not make it through a sword fight because he would be unable to parry or block Kisame's blade and that it would be extremely difficult, if not impossible, to get past his guard. He needed to maintain his distance and hope that gave him the advantage. He slashed his sword through the earth and dashed past several hand signals. "Kaden. Ga Kakia, no Jutsu," he exclaimed, launching a fireball in Kisame's direction and giving Enko a mental pat on the back for making him learn that move. However, that idea was instantly shattered when he witnessed Kisame swing his sword down from his shoulder, the bandaged sword slicing into the fireball and sending it shooting off into thin air. Kisame grinned and raised his sword to his shoulder, asking, "Do they teach you Konoha shinobi nothing about the other villages? Tell you what, Kita, I'll give you one free shot at me. Then I'm going to rip your legs off and ask Itachi to cauterize the wounds," he said with a smile. When Naruto heard this, he started to perspire profusely. Observing his opponent's carefree attitude toward the fight, he realized he needed to take a bold action to either end the fight or at the very least escape. Sasuke's agonized cry diverted his attention, and he cast a worried glance over. Sasuke had picked himself up from the ground in a daze while Naruto was dealing with Kisame, only to discover Itachi was above him. When he attempted to deliver a fast uppercut, Itachi grabbed his fist, slammed it back into his face, and kicked him back into the wall. Sasuke struggled to push himself up, groaning in pain as he felt like he had been hit by a hammer, but Itachi grabbed him and slammed him against the wall. "Why do you persist, Sasuke? You have no hope of beating me. Do not tell me you think that Jinchuriki you fought was a greater opponent than me," he whispered quietly. With a heavy breath, Sasuke raised his head to give his brother a fierce look. With a gasp for air, he moaned, "I vowed to bring you in. Ia made a promise to myself and to Ka.San." At that, Itachi's eyes narrowed. After hearing his brother's remarks, he realized that his brother would continue to pursue him even though he no longer felt the need to harm him. While he was proud of his younger brother's commitment, he also realized that if Sasuke continued pursuing him in this manner, one of the other Akatsuki members would probably end up fighting Sasuke and killing his younger brother. He had to prevent his brother from following this course without jeopardizing his standing in Akatsuki or the confidentiality of what transpired that evening. He made up his mind and pleaded for forgiveness to Sasuke, his mother, and Kaseki. He said, "Allow me to show you the futility of your decision, Sasuke," as his Sharingan changed into the Mangekyu, a pinwheel. Tsukuyomi. Naruto's eyes widened as Sasuke slumped against the wall and screamed out in agony and despair. Kisame's blade nearly paid for that moment of distraction as it slammed down toward him, barely allowing him to dodge back in time. Kisame looked at Itachi and mocked him, saying, "Looks like Itachi is really giving him some brotherly love." Gazing up at Kisame, Naruto was desperately trying to think of a way out of this situation. Try teaching him taijutsu or kenjutsu would be futile, just as ninjutsu was. His eyes narrowed as he had an idea, conjuring up 20 shadow clones in no time. 6 of them dispersed behind Kisame, remaining out of reach as he simply grinned at Naruto while slinging his blade over his shoulder. "Do you really think you can swarm me with numbers?" he asked. Instead of responding, Naruto stayed silent and, like his clones, raised the hood of his outfit. Suddenly, a number of them leapt into the air as one. pulling smoke bombs from their pouches and hurling them to the ground. A great cloud of smoke shot skyward, swallowing Itachi and Sasuke along with Kisame, Naruto, and his clones. With narrowed eyes, Kisame shifted to the side, just in time to feel the wind of a crossbow bolt passing by as he heard the dull thwack of it firing. Similar noises kept coming, and Kisame dodged each one swiftly, raising his sword in time to stop a downward blow from an airborne Naruto. He used his sword to push them aside, but before he could launch an attack, he had to dodge once more as a crossbow bolt burst through the spot where his head had been. He then spun to kick another Naruto that was slashing at him, sending it flying into smoke. He never once noticed the barely perceptible shadow that was patiently waiting and observing while it moved slowly through the smoke. Itachi found himself surprised for the first time in a long time. He could only see a foot or two around him due to the sudden, thick smoke that had rolled in. He was aware that this was a risky situation for Uchiha. Even with all of their Dujutsu's power, it could still be overcome by blocking the wielder's vision. But Itachi had more to rely on than just his Dujutsu. He let go of Sasuke and concentrated on his other senses, tensing up and watching for any movement in the smoke or air, any noise that would suggest another person was nearby. He turned abruptly, his arm brushing against Naruto Uzumaki's as the Jinchuriki landed on him. He hurled the blonde in Sasuke's direction, but he scattered in a cloud of smoke. Suddenly, Itachi ducked as a blade sliced through the air where his head had been, then lunged forward to deliver lightning. Fast punch that hit nothing but air. Simultaneously, he felt a movement to his side and turned to see Sasuke's catatonic form had vanished. A crossbow bolt forced Itachi to lean back slightly, glaring in the direction from which it had come just as he was ready to jump out of the smoke. As he sidestepped another crossbow bolt, Kisame let out a frustrated growl. He exclaimed, "This is pointless, Gaki. I can keep doing this all day." As he noticed the smoke beginning to clear. At that, he smiled, seeing figures begin to come into focus. As he was about to charge at them, a sixth sense suddenly alerted him, causing him to turn around. To his surprise, he saw Naruto's hooded figure approaching him from behind, his left arm extended with a blade protruding from it. As he was about to replace himself, he suddenly felt a sharp pain in one of his legs. It was then that another Naruto vanished into the smoke, having taken advantage of the distraction to dash past Kisame and quickly slash his leg with a kunai. With a swift movement of his head, Kisame avoided being stabbed in the neck by the descending Naruto, who instead cut his cheek. Simultaneously, Kisame seized the boy's neck and started to squeeze, snarling fiercely. He said, "Now you've just pissed me off," to which the wriggling boy fled into the smoke. "What the hell is with all the damn clones?" He yelled angrily before using his sword to spin in a circle and create a small tornado that blew away all the smoke. A half dozen or so clones remained with their crossbows drawn and aimed at the enraged Kisame after a few of them were also struck by the sword and scattered. Seeing the clouds of smoke being blown away, Itachi quickly used a flurry of shuriken to take out those clones, leaving the two Akatsuki in the street. Kisame was snarling fiercely, a small amount of blood dripping from his cheek, a tear in his cloak, and small amounts of blood dripping from his left leg. He surveyed the area slowly, noting that Itachi had remained unharmed. "It seems our prey is more resourceful than I thought." Angrily, Kisame growled, "I swear, I'm going to chop the little bastard's arms and legs off," as she peered around. Where the hell did he go? When a ball of liquid that resembled oil slammed into the spot where they had been, Itachi and Kisame both abruptly jumped back. "I do not know, but I think Itachi said. About a dozen feet away, Jiraiya materialized with an enormous toad, about the size of a horse, its forearms covered in armored bracers. Naruto was beside him, helping the unconscious Sasuke. Jiraiya placed the unconscious woman who had earlier enticed him away on the ground and said, well, Itachi Uchiha and Kisame Hoshigaki. What are two S-ranked missing nins like yourselves doing out here?" Naruto growled and put Sasuke down, saying, "You took your damn time getting here, Ero, Senin. I had the entire situation under control, kid. Don't get your panties in a twist," Jiraiya said to him. Itachi slightly relaxed his posture. "Looks like we're out of time. Let's go," he murmured to Kisame. In response, the blue Kiri missing nin gave a fierce growl. When he snapped back, "We got this far, haven't we? We have to try," Itachi shook his head. "I've expended too much chakra, and while minor, your wounds will slow you down. Even if we were at full strength, a fight between the three of us would likely end in a draw at best. We must withdraw," Itachi stated. Kisame simply gave him another growl and swung his sword onto his back. "Okay, screw it," he uttered. When Jiraiya saw what they were doing, he moved forward rapidly. As his toad companion prepared another ball of oil in its mouth, he exclaimed, "Don't think you two are going anywhere." The two cloaked figures vanished in a shunshin, causing Jiraiya to silently curse. With a sigh of relief, Naruto fell onto the road and onto his butt. His limbs were trembling already, from fear and exhaustion. He gazed at his trembling hands, only raising his head to see Jiraiya's shadow covering him. He discovered Jiraiya staring down at him with concern. He inquired, "You okay, Gaki?" Yeah, I'm just fine. Not like I didn't have a life and death battle with a couple of freaking S-ranked missing nins just now. And saw almost everything I used against them prove worthless," Naruto said as he attempted to calm his hands. It had been one of the worst fights he had ever been in. Although the battle with Gaara had been difficult, Naruto was at least prepared for the possibility of facing him and knew what to anticipate. He had entered the fight blind, and his opponents had neutralized nearly all of his attacks with equal ease, if not more. And they could have done so without even needing Bijutsu abilities. Just as Jiraiya opened her mouth to say something, she noticed Naruto's quivering figure behind them. Kaseki exclaimed, "Naruto?" But then her gaze fell upon Sasuke. Sasuke. Jiraiya turned to watch Kaseki dash forward and close behind Sasuke. All the female Uchiha had to do was glance to see what had happened. "Itachi did this?" she questioned, looking up at Jiraiya and Naruto with a strained voice. Quietly, Naruto nodded. "I didn't see or hear what happened. Itachi had pinned him against a wall, and suddenly Sasuke was screaming it was horrible," he murmured. Kaseki gave a headshake. Whispering to herself as she examined Sasuke for any more wounds, he must have used Tsukuyomi on him too. She raised her head and gave Jiraiya a glare. "And where the hell were you? How did this happen?" That gave Jiraiya a mental flinch. At least not in front of Naruto. He couldn't very well reveal that Itachi had used the Genjutsu'd woman to deliver a report to him. While Naruto was unaware of the truth about Itachi, he knew Kaseki was. Before he could think of a suitable response, Naruto provided one for him. Naruto snorted and said, "He was off chasing some tail, before getting up clumsily and slowly. Which I'm betting those two bastards wanted in the first place." With a wince, Jiraiya waved his hands, sensing the heat of Kaseki's glare. "It's not like that, I swear. I knew she was under a genjutsu, meaning someone wanted to separate us. I followed her in order to draw out whoever was after us, and see who their target was." After giving him a stern look, Kaseki carefully picked up Sasuke. With a curt expression, she continued to glare at Jiraiya. "I'll get him back to Konoha. And you better pray that Sama is in a merciful mood when you return, because I doubt she'll appreciate learning her son was tortured and you could have been there to stop it." At her words, Jiraiya winced, thinking of the wrath that would probably be directed towards him. Had he arrived earlier, he could have intervened before Itachi's actions against Sasuke, but he was too late to stop the fight from starting. He heard Kaseki turn to face Naruto and speak to him in a quieter, more consoling voice. The female Uchiha then vanished, giving him one last fierce look. Jiraiya sighed and turned to face Naruto. "Listen kid, I am really sorry for not being here. I swear to you, I really wasn't just off chasing down a girl. But I could have tried to get back here faster once I knew they were coming for you." After taking a few deep breaths, Naruto glanced at Jiraiya. Emotions still raw from the fight, he yelled, "And why were they coming after me in the first place? Why in the hell did I have two of the worst missing nins in the world targeting me?" Jiraiya took a moment to consider his response before responding. "Let's get back to the hotel room. We'll get some food, give you a chance to try and calm down, and I'll tell you what I can," said the man. After giving him a glare, Naruto pointed a finger. He said, trying his hardest to keep his mouth shut, "You better. I don't like finding out that someone I'm supposed to trust knew I had mass murdering criminals after me and didn't think I should be informed." Jiraiya exhaled heavily as he watched Naruto turn and begin to walk away angrily. He wiped one hand over his eyes and muttered, "Well, looks like I fucked up again," as he began to follow Naruto. What little bond had formed between them was already beginning to break, as far as he could see. He shook his head, hoping that somehow he would be able to make this up. It would be an understatement to say that Orochimaru was in a bad attitude. Gazing over the reports of the abortive invasion of Konoha, he was filled with towering fury. Kabuto, his most dependable lieutenant and a spy inside Konoha, was among the many shinobi he had lost in the battle, and he'd fallen short of his goals. Though bloodied, Konoha remained unbroken, and Sarutobi continued to live. The worst part of it all was that he could have experienced some satisfaction if he had succeeded in killing Sarutobi, but the Raikage's meddling had prevented him from experiencing even that. He tossed the reports aside, stood, and began to pace while growling angrily. This could not continue. This could not be Konoha's way of increasing his notoriety and stature. We could not let his sensei take pride in this triumph. To turn this setback into a personal triumph, he had to find a way to avenge the village. However, how can it be done? He paced silently as he considered the issue. Even for a brief raid, he lacked the manpower for a full-scale attack against Konoha. After the abortive invasion, his shinobi were already bloodied and demoralized, and the village would be on high alert. Even though Orochimaru had no concern for their lives, he was aware that wasting them would not benefit him in any way and would make recruiting more difficult in the future. In what other way could he attack Konoha then? He knew that recruiting the Uchiha he had marked would bring him victory, so he was already making plans to do so, but it might take months before he was prepared. Something more urgent was what he needed. He turned and stopped when he noticed one of the reports on the floor. Recently, an intelligence report from one of the few remaining spies in Konoha arrived. He picked it up and scowled when he read that Jiraiya was mentioned. His eyes grew very wide as he began to read it. Jiraiya had been spotted leaving the village with the Kyuubi Jinchuriki, Naruto Uzumaki. Orochimaru turned this knowledge over in his mind as he glanced up at the ceiling. He was aware that Jiraiya would only leave the village if it was absolutely necessary for its well-being. And it was clearly not a mission of espionage or combat, or he would not have allowed a genin, even one who had shown to be quite cunning and capable, to accompany him. Why would he need to leave Konoha, then? Unless, of course. With a sudden realization, Orochimaru grinned and turned to leave his office, making his way through his underground lair. He soon arrived at a training room where he could make out a figure standing close to a number of targets. They launched multiple tiny pink-colored crystal shuriken at the targets with a sudden flourish, hitting the majority of them. The figure turned to face him as he said, "Gurren, I have a mission for you." "Hello." No Kuni with a frown. Naruto followed Jiraiya back onto the road. He was frowning because he was considering what Jiraiya had told him the day before, following the altercation with Itachi and Kisame. Finding out the real reason they were chasing him had not been simple. Retrospection, Jiraiya clarified. They're part of a group called Akatsuki, as he and Naruto sat in the room together, the latter sipping tea to help settle his nerves. It's a group of missing nin I've been tracking for a few years now. Naruto frowned and put down his cup. He asked Jiraiya, who moved a little uncomfortable, "Okay, so why do they want me? Is this about Kyuubi or my parents?" "It's the former, Gaki. They're after the Jinchuriki. I don't know why yet, just that they're hunting down Jinchuriki. It's part of the reason I came back to Konoha when I did. I wanted to get you prepared for dealing with them, since they're starting to move out. My contacts have heard they're putting feelers out for the identity and locations of the various Jinchuriki across the land," he stated. Naruto inhaled deeply as he attempted to process that knowledge. He said, "Have you told Yugito Ne-san yet?" But Jiraiya just shook his head. "I was more worried about getting you ready since you're a much easier target for them. This is a group of S-ranked criminals. Itachi and Kisame are some of the higher-ranked members of the group, but all of them are deadly," Jiraiya said, only for Naruto to growl. "Got up. If they're that dangerous, then she needs just as much warning as I do. She's strong, but there's no way she can handle two of those guys. That bluefish asshole pretty much blew through everything I had, and Itachi is probably worse than that," Naruto said, slamming his fist. Jiraiya calmly raised his hands. You're right, but like I said, you're an easier target. She's a lot more experienced than you, and could probably escape more easily. I'm just trying to look out for you. But I swear, once we get back to Konoha, we'll tell her together, I promise." Naruto gave him a fierce look and then resumed his seat. "Is that it though? Anything else I need to know? Like maybe having a bounty on my head or there being a secret cult that wants to kill me to release Kyuubi?" he asked sarcastically. "No, nothing at all." Jiraiya shook his head. With a suspicious glance in his direction, Naruto shook his head and stood back up. He turned and left, saying, "I'm taking a shower. Unless you want to go off chasing more tail?" Jiraiya sighed in exasperation. Flashback comes to an end. Naruto had thrown himself into his training after taking a shower and letting himself cool off. For the remainder of the evening, he had one of his clones read the book on Fuinjutsu, and another was reading over the Windjutsu that Jiraiya had given him. Meanwhile, in an attempt to release even more steam, he limited the amount of physical training he could perform without endangering his arm. He was tired by the time he went to bed, but not quite as tired as he had been earlier. Once they were back on the road, Jiraiya tested him on his knowledge of the Fuinjutsu book and the Wind Ninjutsu scrolls. After that was over, Naruto remained irritated and frustrated from the day before, and the two fell into a somewhat tense silence because they had nothing else to talk about. However, Naruto eventually made the decision to speak up. "You know, you still haven't told me what she looks like," he replied. Blinking, Jiraiya glanced over his shoulder at Naruto. "Huh? Tsunade-san. You haven't told me what she looks like. It'll be kind of tough to find her if I can't identify her," he replied. With a sheepish smile, Jiraiya reached into his vest and took out a bounty poster. He said, "Here you go, Gaki," as Naruto arched an eyebrow at the poster. "It seems like she has a bounty on her head," he inquired, removing the poster from Jiraiya, who was still smiling shyly and stroking his long white hair. Naruto glanced at the photo and the Toad Sage replied, "Not for anything really serious. Just maybe crashing a casino and putting 5 of the guards in the hospital." The sight of a very attractive blonde with brown eyes and shoulder-length bangs framing her face startled him. She was wearing a gray sleeveless kimono top that was closed rather low, exposing her ample chest's cleavage, and a green haori over it. She accessorized her look with a necklace featuring a crystal hanging from her neck, a diamond marking in the center of her forehead, and a pair of dark grayish blue pants and strap-on high-heeled sandals. Naruto studied the poster with a frown. "Hold on, isn't she your teammate?" he inquired, glancing briefly up at Jiraiya before turning back to face the poster. "There's no way that's possible. She looks like she's barely in her 30s. You're pushing 50 if not past it already," said Naruto. Jiraiya snatched up the poster, furrowing her brow. "You have my sincere gratitude," he said, tucking it back into his vest. "She uses a jutsu to hide her age, making her look younger than she actually is. She likes to fluctuate it from time to time, going from her early 20s up to her late 30s, but her appearance otherwise doesn't change." At that, Naruto gave a slight shake of his head. He said, "Talk about vain," only to have another poster thrust into his grasp. This time, he discovered a short, black-haired woman with black eyes who was carrying a pig that was strangely wearing a red vest and a pearl necklace. She was also dressed in a long, charcoal-black kimono. Gazing up at Jiraiya, he questioned, "And who is this?" Jiraiya explained, "Shizune, Tsunade's apprentice. She's been traveling with Tsunade ever since my teammate left the village. If we see her, then Tsunade is definitely in the area." Those two are almost never apart, to which Naruto nodded in comprehension. "We'll most likely find them in any town that has casinos or gambling of some type." Tsunade never could say no to a game of chance, Jiraiya said with a little regret. Blinking, Naruto glanced up at him. "Huh?" Jiraiya laughed softly, lost in the past. "Tsunade loves to gamble. Even when she was a kid, younger than you, she was always ready to take a bet. Her grandfather, the Shodai Hokage, he couldn't say no to her, kept giving her money to gamble with. And she was so bad at it too. She lost so many times that people started calling her the legendary sucker. Her luck is that horrible when it comes to gambling," Jiraiya said with a smirk on his. Naruto observed Jiraiya, noting the depressed expression on the elderly man's face. He suspected this was probably related to Tsunade's departure from the village, but he was pretty sure Jiraiya would cut him off if he probed. The young assassin gave him back the poster after he waited for Jiraiya to clear his head. Jiraiya took it and tried to smile once more. He said, "So, we keep an eye out for either of those two, and we'll find them," to which Naruto nodded in agreement. Naruto was unprepared for Jiraiya's subsequent remarks. "The trick will be getting to the right village or town in time." "Huh? What do you mean?" a startled Naruto questioned. "You don't know where they are?" With a sheepish expression once more, Jiraiya replied, "I have a general area but otherwise, no, because Tsunade loses so often, she can incur large gambling debts. She tends to move on from town to town quickly, to avoid the debt collectors. She could be in a town for a couple days or a week, and then a week later she'll have already moved through 3 more towns. The trick will be either finding her trail and following her, or finding a place that is most likely going to draw her in." At that, Naruto groaned and rubbed his forehead. He muttered to himself, "Well, guess this won't be a short trip." Jiraiya grinned and said, "Think of it this way, Gaki. More time to train uninterrupted," while Naruto just grimaced. He exclaimed, "Yippee," as they trudged on, moving on to the next town. Kurama and Konoha compound. In the Kurama clan's main meeting room, Rock Lee knelt down nervously, trying not to show it because he was now in front of Yakumo's parents as well as herself. He was invited to meet with them at the Kurama clan compound, which was located a little further from the village center than other clan compounds, though he wasn't sure why exactly. He made an effort not to move, feeling awkward in his hakama and kimono instead of his typical ninja uniform. Still, He tried to look composed while the chief of the Kurama clan silently observed him. Yakumo's father and the head of the Kurama clan, Murakumo Kurama, said, "I thank you for accepting our invitation, Lee-san." He had light brown eyes, long black hair, and a well-groomed mustache. His build and height were average. Beside him stood his lovely wife Yuriko, whose shoulder-length silver hair and deeper brown eyes matched her husband's. She smiled gently at Lee, and Yakumo, across from Murakumo, tried not to show her nervousness either. Beyond the fact that her parents had expressed interest in meeting with Lee only after she had informed them of the events during the invasion, the heiress was unsure of the precise reason behind their desire. Lee bent his head and then raised it, saying, "Murakumo-sama, I am honored to be invited into your home." All Murakumo did in response was bow his head. "I'm sure you are curious as to why we wished to speak with you. The answer is simple. My wife and I wish to thank you for what you've done for not just our daughter, but for our clan. You have aided my daughter greatly in her training, and she speaks highly of your continual efforts to motivate her. This alone would be enough for us to give thanks, but we find ourselves indebted to you even more." Lee inquired, "What do you mean, Murakumo-sama?" Yuriko grinned and spoke up this time. "You saved our daughter's life during the recent invasion. She told us of how you came to her aid and saved her during the battle. We cannot ever repay you for the life of our daughter." Lee's eyes widened, then he blushed slightly and bowed his head. "Yakumo-san has been an excellent friend and comrade. I would never allow harm to come to her or anyone else I consider a friend, if it was in my power to help them," he said with an air of shame. Murakumo grinned and said, "Even still, we wish to thank you and to let you know that the Kurama clan is indebted to you. You will always find friends here." Then he turned to face Yakumo, his smile becoming slightly more knowing. "Is there anything you'd like to add?" Yakumo blushed and gave Lee a low bow. She said, "Thank you Lee-san, for saving my life," to which Yuriko merely laughed. She said to Murakuma, who laughed, "Dear, let's leave these two so she can more properly thank him. I'm sure our presence is making this so awkward for them." He said, "I'm sure they'll appreciate some privacy," and then he got up, causing everyone else to follow suit. Lee returned the bow when he gave it. "Thank you again, Lee-san." As the two adults left the room, Lee lifted his head in acknowledgement, giving Yakumo a knowing smile in return that resulted in her blushing. Yakumo breathed a sigh of relief when they were gone, and she relaxed, turning to face Lee. She could tell he was nervous, so she apologized profusely and said, "I would have said something ahead of time if I had known what they wanted." Lee just grinned and gave her the go ahead. With his characteristic grin and his normal vigor, he continued, "Fear not Yakumo-chan. I am glad to know that they simply wished to thank me, though it was not necessary." With a smile, Yakumo pointed to a different door that led to a garden on the side of the meeting room. "Glad to see him again," she asked. "How have you been?" They hadn't had a chance to train together since the invasion because Lee and his team were too busy helping to rebuild. Lee informed her that they had been very busy. "My team has been helping out around the village, clearing rubble. We only finished yesterday. We've also been training and taking rotations on guard duty as well. But I am doing quite well. I view it all as a way to express my youth, and help build bonds with my fellow shinobi," he said with a grin. She smiled at him and giggled a little at that. "I'd imagine so. How are your teammates?" "I imagine that Neji-san is perhaps a bit unsettled," she replied. Lee grimaced a little as he nodded. He has been rather quiet since his match with Hinata-san. "I do not know how the battle has affected him," he said with a pensive tone. "I hope he might open up to either Tenden-san or I, so that we can help him." At that, Yakumo smiled warmly at Lee. "Even though he has mocked and ridiculed you in the past?" he responded. Yakumo smiled even more as Lee spoke. "He is my teammate, and he has fought beside me. I will do what I can to help him." She said to herself, "And that, Lee-kun, is one of the reasons I admire you," before inhaling deeply. He gave her a startled look before she stopped him and turned to face him. "Lee-kun, I was hoping that maybe we coulda if you want, she began, but as soon as she saw the expression on his face, she felt extremely shy and stammered over her words. He asked, trying not to smile at the endearing expression of embarrassment on her face, "Yes, Yakumo-chan." Yakumo looked back up at him after taking another deep breath. She watched as his eyes widened in surprise and said, "Would you like to go and get dinner sometime? With me?" He gave her a quick blink before cracking a grin that was softer and more affectionate than usual. He smiled at her and said, "I would not only be honored, but I would enjoy that, Yakumo-chan." Silently observing the two engage, Murakumo and Yuroko could only smile from their respective doorways. Softly, Yuroko remarked, when the two of them met, it was a good day. Yuroko gave Murakumo a light smack on the arm as he continued, I might need to have the father talk with him soon, and the two departed Yakumo with Lee. Neji was seen in another location standing in a training field, breathing heavily while he kept launching combos of Juken strikes against a training post. Every time he struck, he grunted softly because the repeated blows had made his palms and fingertips numb. If the feelings had been a diversion from his thoughts, he would have welcomed them, but they weren't. Rather, his thoughts kept returning to one basic, unavoidable truth. He had fallen short against Hinata. It had seemed impossible to him prior to the finals. He ought to have prevailed. With a year's experience, he was superior to her in Hyuga taijutsu compared to any other Hyuga of his age. He had even deciphered and acquired two of the techniques that the main family had attempted to keep private. He was almost guaranteed to win the fight by fate. However, that was not the case. She had fought him on nearly equal terms, not the victory he was so sure of. Furthermore, she had defeated him. He might have declared himself victorious, but fate had not rewarded him. He was baffled as to why. It was unthinkable that he could fall short, because the only way he could see her being fated to win was if she were a member of the Hyuga clan's main family and thus destined for a life of constant superiority over him. He was unable to even use fate as an excuse for his defeat. However, she was expelled from the clan and labeled as feeble by both her father and the elders. At least in his interpretation of fate, fate would not have taken her side. When he finally stopped hitting the training post, he stood shaking and tried to make sense of what was going on. Since his father's passing, he had lived his entire life believing that fate was in charge of everything and that everything was predestined. And now this one fight had cast doubt on that entire belief. That and what she said later. About how she battled to show her teammates and friends that their confidence in her was well-founded. The thought made Neji shake his head. That's not how she could have defeated him, could she? How could that have made her stronger than him? He let out a growl of exasperation and slammed his fist against the training post, squinting as the hard wood hit his hand. It was a female voice that said, I wouldn't do that. You don't have the toughness and calluses for it, which made Neji look up and see Tenten standing there. As she got closer, he slowly withdrew his hand from the training post and shook it out. What's got you so worked up? He turned back to face the training post and readied himself to attack it once more. Surely you are not serious, Tenten-san, he said. Tenten simply sighed and rolled her eyes as she stepped to the other side of the training post, forcing him to look at her as he struck at it. She crossed her arms and said, You really are obsessing over this, aren't you? You lost, get over it already. How can I simply get over it? She should not have been able to even compete against me. She was weak, worthless, a disgrace that the clan banished. She had no way to develop her Juken or Byakugan, Neji said, only for Tenten to shake her head. Neji, your clan's techniques are strong. The Hyuga are a strong clan. But you're not the end-all-be-all of the shinobi world. Just because she couldn't learn Juken doesn't mean she couldn't grow stronger in different ways. And she clearly did. But have you considered that maybe it wasn't just her techniques that beat you, but something else? Something inside, Tenten replied with a chest tap. Neji halted and turned to face her, remembering what Hinata had said. He told her to elaborate, which made Tenten roll her eyes. I mean that maybe Hinata found something that was worth pushing herself to her limits, and even beyond them. Look at Lee. When we first teamed up, he was an abysmal mess. Now he's so strong and fast I'd be hard-pressed not to be knocked out within the first couple minutes of a spar between us. And that would be with him holding back so as not to seriously hurt me. And he's grown that strong because he has a desire to grow stronger and prove that he can be a strong shinobi even with just taijutsu. Maybe Hinata found the same drive to grow stronger, she said as Neji turned the sky. She told me as much I didn't want to believe her, but she said that was part of what helped her to beat me. After our match, when I asked her, he replied quietly, surely such a thing isn't possible though, is it? That she could deny fate because of emotions. Tenten shook her head and sighed softly. She said, turning to leave her perplexed and irritated Hyuga teammate behind, maybe the reason you can't figure this out is because you keep trying to fit fate into everything. For once Neji, forget about fate. You'll probably get your answer a lot simpler that way. Tanzaku Quarters, following a week. Hino Kuni's Tanzaku Quarters, a well-liked tourist destination, was a busy town. The city was built up around the castle of a known samurai warlord from the warring era prior to the advent of chakra, when armies of samurai retainers and drafted peasants dominated the battlefield. The city was surrounded by a wall to keep out threats. A town had grown up around the castle, which was one of the few buildings that had survived the tumultuous transition to the shinobi period, and it was now a popular tourist destination. There were many plazas, theaters for festivals, gambling establishments, and souvenir shops, all of which contributed to the vibrant atmosphere. The blonde woman, who was sitting in one of the gaming halls staring at the pachinko machine in front of her, didn't seem to be aware of any of this. One would think she would be quite happy, with a large payout awaiting her, given that she had seen a significant portion of the balls being captured. Rather, a frown marred her lovely face as her brown eyes stared at the machine with a mixture of growing astonishment and horror. The woman standing next to her exclaimed, "Oh wow, that's amazing Tsunade-sama. Looks like your luck has finally changed." Tsunade looked over at Shizune, her traveling partner and apprentice, who was beaming broadly at the machine's flashing lights, announcing Tsunade as the winner. Not feeling the same enthusiasm as Shizune, Tsunade turned her back to the machine. Rather than waiting for Shizune to blink and follow her, she grabbed the ticket as it came out of the machine and stood up to cash it in, making sure the pig she was holding was stable and secure. Taking the money that the owner of the establishment had given her discreetly, Tsunade left the building, and Shizune followed, feeling that something was wrong. With concern, "Tsunade-sama, is something wrong?" she inquired. Shizune blinked in surprise as Tsunade said quietly, "We're leaving," and walked forward purposefully. Tsunade's look cut off Shizune's words, "But, you're on a hot streak. Tsunade-sama, if you win a few more times we can finally pay off some of the more immediate gambling debts, and..." Tsunade turned to face Shizune as she calmed down and bowed slightly. Tsunade hadn't told her, so she couldn't hold it against Shizune for not knowing. Since she had been there for the entire time, Shizune was aware of Tsunade's fabled bad luck. She never knew what happened to Tsunade when her luck changed. How horrible things had happened each time it had happened. The only thing she had to be thankful for was that she hadn't really won by a wide margin thus far. She had been lucky in a couple of other small games of chance, and had won a small lottery earlier that morning. Even so, she sensed a terrible thing was about to happen. Shizune frowned as she followed her master, seeing her begin to turn back alleyways and side streets. She could only blink. Trying to find out if anyone was following them, she instantly opened her senses, wondering if Tsunade had sensed someone watching them. Still, she sensed no one was trailing or pursuing them. She trailed Tsunade, keeping her senses keen. Tsunade froze, staring ahead with one fist clenched as the two turned down a side street. Shizune stepped aside to investigate what had stopped the older woman, but as she did, she noticed two figures ahead of them and her frame froze as she recognized one of them right away. Tsunade's old teammate Orochimaru was standing in front of them. Someone who, considering his rather notorious reputation, Shizune knew all too well. Tsunade had informed her about Orochimaru, primarily as a cautionary tale in case they encountered him in the future. Beside the snake Sanin stood a woman with blue hair, her face framed by bangs, her skin pale except for the dark eyes and red lipstick that emphasized her features. She wore a green dress that resembled a kimono with a short right sleeve and a red turtleneck underneath. A rope belt around her waist, brown gloves, and sandal boots that reached her calves completed her ensemble. Orochimaru simply grinned at them and moved forward. "Tsunade-Chana, how wonderful to see you again," he exclaimed. "Orochimaru, it hasn't been long enough," Tsunade said, tensing up in her body. Orochimaru hurriedly glanced at her. Orochimaru asked her, "Is that any way to speak to an old teammate?" Tsunade sneered. "Considering what I've heard about you since I left Konoha, be glad I'm not greeting you with a fist to the face." "What do you want?" she yelled. With a snarl on her face, the woman with blue hair took a step forward, but Orochimaru's hand on her shoulder stopped her. He said, "Careful Gurren. You would be destroyed before you had a chance to even attack her," which made Gurren take a step backward. The Serpent Slayer merely grinned at his erstwhile comrade, resuming his speech. "I simply thought it might be time to finally reconnect with my fellow Sanin. I'm sure you've heard about my recent reunion with Sarutobi, Sensei," he laughed. "It seems like it didn't go too well that you attempted to lead an invasion of Konoha," Tsunade remarked, crossing her arms in an attempt to project a more carefree and casual demeanor. Orochimaru said, still grinning, "Yeah, I might have underestimated the potential dangers of unforeseen variables. But in the end, I like to think I at least gave our old home village a wake-up call. Tensing up a little, Shizune had placed the pig tauntaun on the ground. Tsunade. Sama, as she uttered, putting one hand on the concealed senbon launcher within her kimono's sleeves. Tsunade gave a small nod of her head and then started talking. She observed the tiniest hint of annoyance from Orochimaru and said, "You want to hurry up and tell me what you want? Or did you just come here to reminisce and tell me about your failures? I suppose I shall forego the pleasantry of small talk then. I came here to make you an offer, Tsunade-chan. I want you to work for me," he laughed. Tsunade furrowed her brow. I don't know what the hell you've been drinking to think that was a good idea, but I think even I would want to stay away from it. What exactly makes you think I would even entertain that idea? He responded. Orochimaru just kept grinning at her. I was thinking perhaps I would offer to give you back that which you value most. The two things you want most in this entire world, he laughed. Tsunade scowled at him, her fists clenched as her hands moved to her side. Careful there, hubby. Tem. You know what I can do when I'm angry. And don't think your helper there will even slow me down, she cautioned him. Indeed, but I'm not here to anger you, Tsunade-chan. I'm here to make a sincere offer. I've learned a lot in my time away from Konoha. Even a very unique jutsu your granduncle created. One that would make you quite happy. My offer is simple. Agree to work for Maya and I'll return to you both Naoki and Dan, he stated. Tsunade snarled, dropping to a crouched position and tensing up as she got ready to leap at him. Shouting, "Don't you dare speak their names." She threw herself forward and clenched her fist. As Gurren stepped forward to shield Orochimaru, Tsunade's fist struck her before she could respond. Suon's eyes widened as she vanished in a cloud of smoke. Orochimaru only gave a sly smile before vanishing into another cloud of smoke, and another one materialized on one of the rooftops alongside Gurren. I was hoping your temper wouldn't get the best of you, but it pays to be cautious, he said. Gurren accompanied Orochimaru as he said, I'll give you a week to consider my offer, Tsunade-chan. And I'll even give you proof that my offer is genuine. Expect a visit from a old friend in 3 days' time. With a growl of frustration, Tsunade pounded a fist into one of the building's walls, leaving a sizable hole in the wall. Tsunade pulled her fist out of the hole, relieved that no one was inside the room on the other side. Shizune then came back to her, followed by tauntaun. Tsunade. Sama, she questioned softly, a little trembling in her voice. I need a drink, Tsunade declared as she turned to leave the alleyway, Shizune trailing closely behind. Shizune stopped only to pick up tauntaun and carry her with her. It was getting dusk when Jiraiya and Naruto arrived in the town that evening. Upon meeting Akatsuki, the two had proceeded on a forced march of shinobi. Shinobi typically traveled in groups of 2 ways when they needed to cover a lot of ground quickly, either on foot or by tree, hopping as fast as they could for a considerable amount of time. Depending on the chakra and stamina of each shinobi in the group, they would maintain that pace for 1 to 2 hours. After that, they would slow down to either a light jog or brisk walking pace for 30 minutes, before going back to the faster pace. They would stop every 4 hours for a breather, usually lasting no longer than 10 to 20 minutes, before continuing their journey. For approximately a week, Naruto and Jiraiya had been traveling at this speed, only pausing in towns to inquire about Tsunade's whereabouts, which was how they ended up here. Upon entering the city walls, Jiraiya could only smile. I've got a good feeling about this town, he stated. Naruto gave his remark a snort. He shot back, you said that about the last 2 towns, to Jiraiya's wave of a hand. Before becoming more serious, he grinned and said, I was close on the last one though, wasn't I? She passed through there only a few days ahead of us. Go ahead and send your shadow clones out, see if they can spot either of them. If not, I'll start my questioning tomorrow, Jiraiya said. In an instant, Naruto called forth 20 shadow clones, each of whom nodded before taking off in various directions. A portion of them ventured onto the streets and alleys, whereas some ascended to the rooftops, dispersing and swiftly vanishing into the darkness. Jiraiya was followed by Naruto, who decided to go to a restaurant first for some food. Jiraiya looked back at Naruto as they strolled. You know, I'm honestly kind of surprised how well you reacted to my investigation method, Jiraiya said. The Sannin had expected Naruto to chastise him for wasting their time when they had first seen Jiraiya sitting in a gentleman's club, with 2 escorts sitting on either side of him, flattering and giggling while he got drunk. Rather, Naruto had just informed him that his own research had yielded no results before departing. Naruto walked beside Jiraiya, shrugging. Information comes from all kinds of sources. And few sources are as informative as those in the seedier side of society, Naruto stated to him. One of the things I've learned from my time with Raphael, sensei. That caused Jiraiya to scowl a little, but he made sure Naruto couldn't see it. The statement was true, so he was unable to refute it. Criminals, gamblers, crime lords, geisha, and bar owners are among those who frequently hear and know things about the community that the general public would never suspect. However, the fact that Naruto appeared to have already been exposed to this kind of world to the extent that it did not surprise him bothered him a little. He shook his head and turned back to face forward. We'll probably want to hit the various gambling establishments first. Even if she isn't in one of them, the owners will have seen her, he stated. After nodding, Naruto stopped and his eyes widened as one of the clones vanished and its memories came back to him. He said, "Found her," which made Jiraiya spin around to face him in surprise. "What, already?" With wide eyes, he inquired as Naruto nodded and gestured slightly to the left. "She's sitting in a restaurant about 200 meters that way. My clone got a glimpse, and it looks like she's drinking herself into a stupor. Her assistant Shizune-san is there as well, looking uncomfortable," he said. At that, Jiraiya scowled a little. He turned to face Naruto and remarked, "Tsunade likes to drink, but this doesn't sound like an enjoyment binge. Something might be up. Alright, follow me Gaki, but don't spook her. And keep your shadow clones close, in case she tries to make a break." Naruto blinked but nodded, knowing that as soon as the first one scattered, his clones would already be gathered there. Pointing quickly, he guided Jiraiya to the restaurant. As they got there, Jiraiya led the way. He warned Naruto to act like we weren't expecting her to be there, but the blonde just shook his head. He said, "You really think she'll fall for that?" Jiraiya just shrugged. He smiled sheepishly and said, "Not really, but she'll be expecting me to act that way," which made Naruto give him a cold, hard look. Jiraiya simply turned around and re-entered the restaurant, taking a quick look around before becoming startled. "Is that you, Tsunade-chan?" he said with a surprised tone. Following in his wake, Naruto was able to get a closer look at the two women they were tasked with finding. He had to admit, Tsunade was pretty attractive, even with that beauty tainted by the sour expression on her face as she now glared drunkenly at Jiraiya, who was ambling over to her table. Shizune looked surprised and still worried, and Naruto just followed and sat down. Tsunade put down the empty cup she was holding and snarled angrily. Pouring herself another cup, she demanded, "Jiraiya, you old lecher. What are you doing here?" Jiraiya responded, helping himself to the sake after she had poured her cup. "Oh, we were just looking for a place to get food before we turned in for the night. Just got to town, looking for a comfy bed for the night. I'm honestly surprised to see you here though. Small world, isn't it?" he responded. Tsunade sneered. "Yeah, small world," she remarked mockingly as she peered at the armed person standing next to Jiraiya. "And who's this shrimp? Get yourself a new apprentice. Hope you're not filling his head with bullshit like you did the last one," she replied. Jiraiya stiffened slightly, feeling Naruto stiffen beside him. Even though she didn't realize it, Jiraiya could tell the boy was upset about Suon's slight of his father. However, before speaking, Naruto inhaled deeply. He said, "Naruto Uzumaki, genin of Konoha," in a brief voice. Hearing his name, Tsunade blinked and fixed her attention on the blonde boy, but then she saw it. She stammered, putting down the cup, "Well, I'll be Minato and Kushina's kid, all grown up and a ninja now," she began. "Figures Jiraiya would take an interest in you, since he..." Naruto looked around and said, "Taught my father." "Yes, I know, though I'd appreciate it if you didn't announce that fact to the entire world." Luckily, it didn't seem like anyone was nearby, but he still wanted to be safe. The last thing he desired was to be pursued by a Kumo extraction team or an Iowa death squad. Tsunade gave that a snort. She pulled a deck of cards from her jacket pocket that was slung over the back of her chair and said, "Kid has some sense at least. Not out to be some hero or something. So are you going to tell me why you're really here, Jiraiya? I don't think it's a coincidence that shortly after Konoha is attacked, you show up," she said as she moved around the deck. Jiraiya let out a sigh and lost his cheerful demeanor. As he watched her distribute the cards, he said, "Okay. I am here as per Sarutobi Sensei's directives," he declared, taking up his cards and perusing them. He wants you to return to Konoha at once. Tsunade remained silent for a short while, examining her own cards, then placed 2 cards down and drew 2 more. She questioned, her tone becoming more serious but yet carrying an air of inebriation. "And what does he want from me?" she asked. "We need your help in healing wounded from the invasion. There are several people who would recover faster, or have a higher chance of recovery, if you were present. However, that is not the only reason. Sarutobi Sensei is retiring again and you're the best choice to become Hokage," he stated, discarding 3 and drawing 3 more. Tsunade tensed up, gazing at her deck. Her hand was very strong. She held 4 of a kind. She inhaled deeply and turned to face Jiraiya, who was arranging his 3 newly acquired cards. She asked, trying to keep her expression as neutral as possible. "Is that so?" Jiraiya silently nodded. He grinned and continued, "You're the best candidate out of all of them, unless you like the idea of me taking over the village." But Tsunade ignored his humor and kept her attention on him. "Did you and Sarutobi Sensei really think I would accept?" he responded. Jiraiya groaned in exasperation and then let go of the smile. He laid his cards on the table and revealed a flush. "We both believe you're most likely the best person for the job. I have obligations that prevent me from taking the position. And the next best choice would most likely run the village into the ground," he said. Tsunade placed her own winning hand down after taking a quick glance at the cards. She said, "Then you and Sarutobi both are going senile," which shocked Shizune and Naruto into staring at her. "There's no way in hell I'm going back to that cursed village, let alone becoming its leader." Jiraiya scowled at her expression. He began to say, "Tsunade," in a serious tone, but she interrupted him. "You know just as well as I do that the position of Hokage is cursed. Sarutobi Sensei is the only one who's managed to avoid it so far, but not by much. My grandfather, granduncle, your student Thaw, all of them died. And how many people have died chasing the dream of being Hokage?" she said, gently adjusting the necklace around her neck. "It's a fool who wants to be Hokage, and I'm no fool. Let some other idiot take the position." Shizune cast a downward glance as Tsunade's remarks saddened and slightly embarrassed her. Knowing precisely what had led Tsunade to hold these beliefs, Jiraiya shifted uneasily as he attempted to decide how best to proceed. The trio turned to stare at Naruto as he stood there, head lowered slightly so his eyes were shadowed, but it was his slow ascent to the surface that surprised them. He said simply, "Jiraiya Sensei, when you're done with this coward, I'll be waiting for you outside." Just as he turned to walk out, a fist slammed onto the table, stopping him in his tracks. Tsunade yelled, "What the hell did you say, brat?" while glaring at Naruto, who just turned to face her with icy eyes. "You heard me, you're a coward, sitting here, slandering the dead, insulting people who were willing to give everything they had, even their lives, to protect the ideals they believed in, and the village they swore to lead and preserve. What gives you the right to judge them, you who only seem interested in drinking and gambling and shirking any kind of responsibility to those in need? You're nothing but a coward, and a disgrace to your grandfather and granduncle," Naruto said in a loud voice. With a yell, Tsunade turned the table over and got to her feet. She yelled at Naruto, "Shut up, brat. You have no idea of the kind of hell I've been through." Even as he turned to face her, Naruto shot back, "And you have no idea what I've been through. Doesn't change what I see in front of me." He was aware that he was offending a Sannin, someone on par with Orochimaru or Jiraiya. Furthermore, he was well aware that he had very little chance of defeating someone like Orochimaru based on his clone's experience. However, it had infuriated Naruto to hear her disparage his father in that way, a man Naruto never met due to the Kyuubi attack. Thanks to the scrolls his parents had left him, he was aware that his father had cherished the village and that becoming Hokage had been his dream, to be able to do everything in his power to defend Konoha, the village's principles and its residents. Even though Naruto did not share his father's level of desire, he was still able to comprehend the man's emotions. Furthermore, he became enraged upon hearing Suon disparage one of the things he shared with his father. Tsunade stood over him, growling. She insisted, "I'll show you Gaki. Outside, right now," but Naruto just laughed. He replied, "Oh sure, a Sannin fighting a Genin. That'll prove you're not a coward," and moved aside. "After you." Jiraiya grabbed Naruto as Tsunade began to storm outside, Shizune trailing behind. "Gaki, what the hell are you doing? You're going to get yourself killed here." Naruto gave Jiraiya a look. He said, "Don't worry, Arrow, Sennin," and went outside. With a growl, Jiraiya followed him. As Naruto stepped in front of her, Tsunade just stood there and glared at him. "I'll make this quick, brat. One single finger is all I need to put you down for a week," she replied. Jiraiya shook his head, sensing that this would not end well, but Naruto just remained silent and assumed a taijutsu stance. The genin suddenly made the hand sign for his Kage Bunshin and shot forward, towards Tsunade. Two shadow clones materialized on either side of him right away. The three charging blondes quickly changed positions, confusing Tsunade as to which was the real one, and then all three moved to attack her. Tsunade's eyes widened at that. Before unleashing a forceful kick that knocked all three of them off balance, she forcefully slammed her fist into the ground, causing the road to tremble. Her eyes expanded upon discovering that all three had been clones when they erupted into smoke. Four more dropped down on her at the same moment, fists clenched. Tsunade snarled and leapt to her feet, throwing a barrage of punches that destroyed all four of them. Naruto charged at her as she landed another, retaliating with a fist. She kicked a rock at it, believing that would disperse it since it was another clone, but instead, the force of the blow caused Naruto to skid backward as the rock struck him. When she realized that was the real Naruto, she threw herself at him and used chakra to knock him unconscious by flicking her finger at his forehead. However, Naruto erupted into smoke as her fingers touched it, exposing a second clone. Simultaneously, she sensed a metal object prodding her back, precisely behind her heart. Naruto surprised both Jiraiya and Shizune by standing behind Tsunade and aiming the hidden blade from his left bracer at her back. He could have stabbed through and punctured her heart if he'd wanted to. Jiraiya realized what Naruto had done quickly, and he narrowed his eyes. He had concealed his presence with his clones by switching them out frequently and utilizing their speed and numbers to prevent Tsunade from ever seeing the real him. As soon as he had her off balance, he went in for the kill, striking at her back just before she had a chance to flip him around. But Jiraiya knew that if Tsunade had been sober and concentrated, this result would not have occurred. Her senses and reflexes were slowed by her inebriation, which was the only thing that allowed him to get this lucky. She was also enraged by Naruto's remarks. Even then, she had continued to tear through his clones. Nevertheless, he couldn't help but be proud of Naruto for outwitting his opponent. First of all, as Naruto pulled out the concealed blade behind her, Tsunade glanced over her shoulder before facing him. She looked him over, noticing the weapons and equipment he carried, as the abrupt realization that he could have really killed her there had a sobering effect on her. In particular, the blade that went back into his bracer's underside. He was prepared to fight and kill her rather than just being a mere genin daydreaming of heroics. Nevertheless, she could feel her temper rising, fueled by her humiliation that he had actually managed to surprise her. She yelled at him, "Brat, don't think that counts. I was holding back, and don't think this changes anything. I'm not going back to Konoha." At that, Naruto shrugged. After saying, "I don't really care. You wouldn't benefit the village anyways," he turned to leave. "I'll go find us a hotel, Arrow. Senin," he said to Jiraiya. Jiraiya simply sighed and turned to face Tsunade, who was still very angry. "Tsunade, this isn't a request. Sarutobi Sensei has ordered you back to the village. Even if you're not going to take up the mantle of Hokage, he still wants you back in the village." Tsunade merely gave him a glare. "And what's he going to do if I refuse? He can't mark me as a missing nin. That'll just have every shinobi from other villages swarming down on me to try and capture or persuade me to join them. There's nothing he can do to bring me back." Before speaking, Jiraiya simply gave her a dejected and disappointed look. "He thought you'd say that. I was hoping it wouldn't come to this. Buddha, if you don't return to the village, he'll freeze the Senju accounts, preventing you from drawing any more money. You'll be completely on your own financially." At that, Tsunade froze, her mouth hanging open in shock before glaring angrily at Jiraiya. If she lost access to the Senju accounts, she knew she would never make it. Even though she was able to elude the majority of debt collectors, a few were able to corner her. Unless they became extremely violent or made completely absurd demands, she would use funds from her family accounts to settle the debts. She would be insolvent from her gambling debts and unable to pay them off without the Senju accounts. Knowing that she was effectively trapped made her feel even more enraged, so she turned and stormed off, Shizune bowing to Jiraiya. The assistant with raven hair apologized for any inconvenience she may have caused, Jiraiya sama, and then hurried to follow Tsunade. Jiraiya simply sighed and sent a clone after them, who then turned to pursue Naruto. This was turning out to be just as tedious as he had anticipated. Prior to the figure vanishing to inform their master of this new development, he failed to notice that it was observing the entire scene from an alleyway.
That's it for today. I hope you guys enjoyed this great story. See you in the next one.